first item is a request for determination of applicability for, yes, I should inform folks here today that this is being videotaped for public access viewing. And if anyone else would intend to record, they should inform the chairman prior to the meeting. So the first item is the request for determination of applicability for Mary Jane Trust, 1039 Route 28, proposal for resource area delineation. I am going to excuse myself from this hearing.
They've actually asked for a continuation
Okay.
until March 18th.
Okay, if somebody would like to make that motion.
I'll make a motion to continue the Mary Jane Trust, or RDA until March 18, is it?
Yep.
Seconded by Stan. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
The next one's also a continuance, Mr. Chairman, so just want to announce it.
Okay. Next on the agenda is a request for determination of applicability for the Dunn property on 49 Nons Road, proposal for a deck expansion. They've also requested a continuance to March 18th. I move that we grant that.
I'll second.
Second that by Carolyn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, next we have a request for an amended order of conditions for 6 and 10 Neal Road shorefront protection proposal.
Oh, yeah.
Would anybody like a really large plan, so you don't have to look at your computer for that?
Sure.
Brad, I think you have one in your packet.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe a couple people can share. That might be two different things there. Hold on. Here.
Actually, we can share this.
Okay.
Don Monroe from Coastal Engineering. This is a familiar project with you folks. We came back a while back and asked for a similar type of project, although we, through discussions with the commission, opted to remove the repair to the groins and remove the nourishment below mean high water, only because the owners needed to make sure that they were able to put the stairway in that is going to be constructed starting tomorrow. Also, the drift fence, they wanted to be able to install that, and also put some nourishment up above mean high water, so you approved that. During the couple of hearings that we had with the commission, we indicated we would probably come back after that approval for an amendment to continue on trying to permit the groin reconstruction and the nourishment below mean high water. We went back to waterways with this particular plan that just shows the nourishment below mean high water, the access way, the limit of work, and the reconstruction of the two groins. Waterways approved that. We got an additional letter from Heinz Prof regarding the shellfish in this location. The Waterways approved it, and John Rendon, as before, didn't have any issue with navigation as far as what our proposal is. So we're back wanting to go through this process to seek permits to be able to do this work. We do have to get Chapter 91 permits and licenses, so it's going to be a year's process, but this is the first step. Well, Waterways was first step. This is the second step to that process.
Okay. Amy, any comments for us on this?
Can you just describe again, you probably did last time, a
That's
couple
all right.
months ago, but the construction process for the two groins? So,
Sure.
and it is the two central groins, not the two outer groins that they're talking about. No, you gotta either hold it or bring that closer to you.
I'll just bring this over here. So the section views are the easiest way to see the groin reconstruction. These are were constructed in the 50s by the state. There was DPW contract plans. They had on those, and we have those contract plans, a certain height of the groins and a certain cross-section. So what we want to do is tighten the groins back up to what was the design of them originally. We believe that much of the interior of the groin is now probably lost or sunk out of sight. There's probably, in the original design, there were smaller rock underneath the larger rock. So what we would do is take those rocks that are there, set them aside, reconstruct the center portion of it with the smaller rock that we would have to bring in because we don't think there's much of it left. Then reconstruct to the designed footprint, which is what we've shown on here. That's actually from the DPW contract plans. As you recall back when we made the first filing, Amy Hennig from Natural Heritage wanted to see additional sections through the groin, so we put those on here and we submitted with her again. We haven't heard back from them. We didn't get a notice of take on the last time around. We don't think we will this time, but we obviously have to wait for them to chime in. So we aren't going any wider than the existing footprint that's out there, even though that footprint, it's kind of dilapidated. But you can see basically the existing, or what the design footprint was. It's not the errant rocks that are off to the side, so we wouldn't be building it out to the rocks that have collapsed off to the side. We would be building it to the design spec, which is approximately 12 feet of exposure above the sand that you see right now. And we wouldn't go any wider than that. The toe stone on either side, which is this stone here and this stone here, that is actually the 12-foot width, and then it would be buried, and we're trying to show that in some instances where the sand elevation on either side covers that particular toe rock. So we're really in an effort just trying to tighten it up so that it retains the sand that we're going to place for the beach nourishment. And that's why we're only doing the interiors. The exteriors could be rebuilt, but there's no reason for us to rebuild those if we can retain most of the sand using the two interior groins. So we're not going outside the footprint that's basically there. We're just going to tighten the whole structure, two structures back up.
Okay.
We will have to bring in some rock. I think typically on a rock revetment you bring in about 20 to 25% additional rock because it falls apart. You got to tighten it up. But it's probably going to be less in this area. We're probably going to bring in more of the smaller rock to put into the core as opposed to exterior rock. And if we do run out of rock, more than likely we would end up shortening this to make up the rock rather than bringing in the rock and keeping that length. Talked to Dave Requena and Mr. Judge about that. We want to try to just use the rock that's there for the exterior portion of it and just make sure the core is built up to what's the Army Corps spec.
Okay. So in your Dropbox, I also included the coastal processing specialist Greg Berman's report from the last go-around because it is applicable to here. He talked about nourishment below mean high water. And he noted that Nantucket Sound is sand-starved. He said that so long as the proposed project does not have a negative impact to shellfish or eelgrass, that nourishment below is feasible without too many potential negative impacts. Heinz and Greg stated that eelgrass is not immediately adjacent to the site. It's a bit offshore. Shellfish are most likely present in the intertidal, but in unknown numbers. Heinz had called said, Nantucket, the near shore of Nantucket Sound is sporadically populated, is what he's called it. He doesn't nourish there, so I think there most likely are shellfish there. However, maybe I think there's also benefits to doing the nourishment there for the interests of the coastal beach as well as protection of the coastal dunes. So. In most areas, the addition of sand is relatively minor, but as you get up closer, I think, to the mean high water line, you get to the 2.5 foot thickness range, which if shellfish were buried with that, could have, they wouldn't be able to stand that. So my recommendation would either be to kind of phase it or do the one-time nourishment as proposed, but then reseed. The understanding you're going to have some loss, we can't quantify it, but some loss, and do some modest amount of reseeding in that intertidal zone. We can't vote tonight because of NHESP, guess I'll say it at this point.
Okay, thanks, Amy. I've got a question up front before we go around the table, and the last time we had a hearing, we talked about having an eelgrass survey before we moved ahead, considering nourishment below mean high water.
We're coming up to the season when we can actually do that survey. So if that is something the commission wants to see, then maybe we could also address at the same time what we might need for shellfish mitigation, if any, and then do a date specific to beyond the date that we should be doing the eelgrass survey, so that we don't have to come in multiple times,
Yeah.
because we know we have to go through the 91 process anyway. I think sometime in like early, mid-May, we'd be able to do the eelgrass survey, because that's when most of the grasses are starting to come to life.
That's
And
a
I
lit-
have a
that's
diver
lit-
that could go,
That's a little early.
is it early?
Yeah, that's a little bit early.
Well, then maybe you guys can make a recommendation as to when we should do that, and then we could come back after that survey to a date specific to provide that information.
Okay.
Can I ask a question relative to that
Sure.
real quick? It would be more for your client, so that is, the survey would be more applicable for the nourishment portion, not so much the groins. If the client wanted, because the application process for structures below mean high water is so intense, would it make sense, I mean, not tonight, because we can't anyway, but would they want approval for that piece? No, they don't want to separate that
We
anymore?
don't have to separate them,
Okay.
because the mean high water below,
Yeah.
as well as the structure, because there's a combined structure and permit application requirement,
All right.
because you gotta go to 401
Yeah.
water quality for a fill permit. David Wong issues
I
that,
understand.
Dave Hill waits for that till he can issue a structural license, and then they combine the two.
Yeah.
So
All right.
separating won't save us any time.
Okay, I was just checking.
Right.
Thank you, though.
I think it's a very good idea, and I think we should hold on to that thought, because I don't think you're going to find full support for the nourishment component. So let's just, I think people should consider that maybe a path forward. Let's see, want to start with you, Jim?
Sure. Yeah, I think I'd like to see the eelgrass survey before really considering it more. That's my comment.
Okay. Thoughts or comments, Ernie?
No, there's a lot to digest here. Don, you have a series of photos from 1990 to 2018 of the vegetation and the line of vegetation, I guess, based on where it exists today versus where it was in each of the successive photographs. So this doesn't necessarily indicate, these don't indicate any sort of erosion of the actual beach itself then, is that correct?
Yeah, it would in a way, because the erosion that's at the toe of the dune is a result of the beach dropping, the elevation of the beach. So if you wanted us to, because we did a survey for Tom White when he owned it, we had a beach elevation then, we could put that on the plan to show you the drop in beach elevation.
I'd love to see that. I think that'd be very, very helpful, I think, for my consideration anyhow.
And keep in mind that the beach is anything from mean low up is really,
Yeah.
is the coastal beach, which has
Right.
dropped.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
There's also evidence of that by the fact that the groins are falling apart. They're falling apart because the sand has dropped on either side, and that's why the rocks roll out, because the elevation of the beach is lower
Well,
now.
and that's what I was trying to discern from these photographs, what the impact of has been on the groins themselves. You know, if they're becoming more submerged or just
They're just-
deteriorating or
They're not
what?
submerging so much as they're rolling off. You'll find the rocks are dissipating off laterally,
Mhm.
because there's no structural support under that was the structural support before, which is
Yeah.
the sand.
But you're not really proposing to put any additional structural support under them. You're just going to redo the interior of the groins
Right,
themselves.
so when you peel it apart like
Yeah.
if you fold it open, so you peel the rock off, then you have an open area. We did this at the North Jetty and the South Jetty at Pamet River. The contractor had, because that was so wide, but it's a similar process. he was able to walk out onto the end of it, then peel the rock apart as he backed out. Then he was able to redo the interior, then build the rock
Right.
back on top of the interior with the existing rock.
And
So it'd be a similar process.
And what's the experience been on that one as far as durability and,
That was redone in
Resilience.
2009 and hasn't shown any signs of change since then. If the rock is tightened up and the core is placed, we should see that these would, since they were built in the 50s, we've only seen this kind of dilapidation on some of those groins along the shoreline only in the last 10 years. So that's a 10 years, so from 1950 to 2005,
why just in the last 10?
storm events. They're increased in intensity.
All right, good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Stan?
Yeah, I guess I have some questions about the nourishment. You're saying up to 2.5 feet potentially. And I guess my question, like I always have, is how long is that really gonna last? Is it I know, because, I mean, we were talking about
Yeah.
the shellfish
That's a
here.
good question.
So if you're gonna wash it away, even if you nourish it, then what's gonna happen in a year or two when that sand's washed? Let's assume it's only a couple of years. You're gonna wanna re-nourish it again,
Probably.
and then we have the whole shellfish issue again. So I guess that's my biggest concern right there is how do we really do it? That's a ongoing battle with Mother Nature there, so.
I think the town faces that every year when they do the dredging, and they place the material above mean high water, and that material above mean high water still ends up out in the nearshore area. And it does the same, it effectively does the same thing. The only difference is when you place it below mean high water, had a similar project, I described it last time in Chatham. We are able to dissipate wave energy better by placing the sand at a 10-to-1 slope on the beach face rather than just piling it up on the dune area. It just makes more sense because it's the only available avenue for a person that has a post-78 home to create some coastal resiliency. And that's the big move is DEP is trying to help us and help commissions try to understand the dynamic of nourishment and how it can dissipate wave energy if you use coarse or grain sand. It's unfortunately, south of here, they do it a lot. They pump millions of cubic yards of sand on the shores south of us, you know, and that's one of their methods of coastal resiliency. So this person has a post-78 home. Many of the structures are very expensive, and I realize that that's the risk you take when you're on the shoreline. But at the same time, part of the risk to reward would be to be able to be allowed to do the very most that you're able to do, which would be, in this case, nourishment below mean high water as well as reconstruct the groins. Not only that, but the thing you already approved, help us be able to place sand through a permit to build up the dune. They're the only soft things available. Fiber rolls would just be a waste really here because they would just end up in the ocean.
Cal?
These groins now are about 70 years old.
Yeah, they built in the 50s.
In the
You know,
50s.
they built them anywhere from 45 to 55.
Okay, so
Yeah,
they're
you're right.
about 70 years
Yeah.
old. And you've only seen the deterioration, though, really in the last 10 years or so.
The most significant
The
deterioration.
most significant
Yeah.
deterioration.
Yeah.
And you're attributing that deterioration to storms,
Intensified storm events in
intensified storm
Yeah.
events. So if you're rebuilding this in the same design, why do you think, what makes you think it will last more than 10 years? If we're expecting pretty much the same number of storms, maybe even a few more. I mean, why isn't it?
Keep in mind that during the course of the time frame when these were built, we had a couple of hurricanes that attacked this location, and they survived those. Those were because it was built and solid at the time it was built. But then over time, as things wear down, which these have, then you've compromised the structure. We're not gonna be compromising the structure when we initially install it. So any storm events that come because of the design work before, under those intense storm events, hurricanes, that we believe the same thing will take place, that over time, certainly they will start to deteriorate like any structure that we put on the coastline, and then we would be looking for maintenance. There has been no maintenance done on these since they were ever constructed. If they were maintained over the period of time, then during those storm events, we wouldn't have seen the deterioration, because we've been able to make them stay tight.
So does your client have plans for maintenance?
Oh, yes, because the permit we apply for to the Army Corps will be to license and maintain the existing footprint of the reconstructed drawings, which you can't do now because the state owned them and the state opted not to maintain them. I've talked to Dave Hill in the past about these drawings, and he said any owner that has them on their property, if they want to maintain them, they can apply for a license to maintain them.
You apply for a license, but you would still have to come in front of us each
Correct.
time you wanted to maintain.
Yes, we would, obviously, if there was any maintenance work, we'd have to talk to Amy first, ask her what we would come in front of you with, if either it's a notice or a RDA or whatever, to do the maintenance.
Mhm.
But the license allows maintenance without having to go back to the state or the Corps for additional permitting. But it doesn't obviate having to come back to you.
Okay, and now the excavator, the heavy equipment that you plan to use, you'll take off the beach every night?
Yes. Yeah, there's an access. It's the same access to do the work they're doing now. And that access is right up off of Needle Road. And there's an area right here they can store, or they can come up onto the judge's
Mhm.
driveway.
And what is your timetable again to do the groins?
It would be next fall.
Next fall. And what is your timetable for the stairs that we approved?
They're working on those tomorrow. They're gonna be installing the stairs and the fence beginning tomorrow.
Okay, we can believe you.
Well, I just talked to Dave Requena last night. He wanted to
Okay.
be here tonight. If we continue, he'll be here then, and he can tell you as the contractor, but he told me tonight that he's beginning those tomorrow. They actually they prefabbed all the panels, so they don't have to do any cutting on site. So they just have, Skipper Lee's gonna install the posts and then install the panels. And then the stairway, I think Dave's gonna build himself, and that right after they get the fence installed, the stairway will get installed. And I think he said that's all prefab too.
Okay. I think, unless I hear more, I would be more in favor of phasing in the nourishment. But that's just my thought right now.
Thank you. Mark?
Abstain.
Okay. John?
Okay, so there's something that puzzles me about the design, or maybe just the plans that I don't understand, which is looking at the elevations from the side for the groins. And maybe some of this has been on the plan all along, and I just didn't notice it before, but it looks like at least above mean high water, the elevation of the nourishment is over the top of the groins, above mean high water. And it's a little hard to tell what's happening below mean high water, but it looks like it's at least up to the top of the groin. And so I have two questions about that. One is, why would you be nourishing over the top of the groin? Isn't that sand just gonna get moved immediately anyway? Isn't it gonna get washed east from there, one way or another? My other question is, you just said that, at least I thought I heard you say, that the groins haven't settled, and you're trying to restore the elevation of the beach the way it used to be, but those two statements are inconsistent with each other, because if the groins were built on a higher beach, they'd have a higher elevation than they do now. So, and the final question there is it correct you're not planning to change the elevation there, or do I have that part wrong as well?
So, start with the easy one, settlement. There's an impression of settlement. Settlement means that to me, is that the thing is sinking into the ground. The elevation has dropped, but it's because the rocks on the side that hold the top rock in place have fallen away, then that will drop. So it's not settling into the grade of the beach, but it has dropped in elevation. So yes, we are establishing and reestablishing the elevation to the design of the top of the groin. And yes, the two sections through the groin, we do show sand over, it looks like it's over the top, although that line is looking past the groin, so the sand won't be on top of the groin itself. It'll be at a higher elevation just beyond this side of the groin and that side of the groin. But we won't pile it on top of the groin itself. So these compartments will be filled up, and that filling up will be to establish the 10-to-1 slope. As we call that 10-to-1 slope out here, we want to push that 10-to-1 slope out so that it actually is mimicking the beach slope. In order to establish that, we have to make the elevation of the sand slightly higher than the elevation of the groins. And yes, that sand may disappear, but it will dissipate in a slower fashion over time because it's at a smooth plane and it's at a 10-to-1 slope, which is what a beach slope is, as opposed to piling it up here and then allowing it to scour and then dissipate on its own. So it is, there's no, it's not trickery, it's the elevation of sand just beyond each of the groins on either side is higher than the groin itself.
So, but the elevation of the groins is gonna be higher when you're done than where it is now?
Yes.
And which elevation is shown on those sections? The existing elevation or the new elevation?
That's a good question. It's the design elevation. We haven't shown the existing condition elevation of the rock because we wouldn't have been able to show it clearly enough because of all the busyness of the plan itself, but we could, underneath each one of these sections, since we're probably gonna have to come back, we could show the existing and then the proposed.
I'm not asking for that, I'm just trying to understand what's drawn there, that's all.
Yeah, what's on there is the design elevation.
So it doesn't answer my other question, which maybe we don't need to answer, but I'm still curious about it. If the original groins were built on top of a beach that had a higher elevation, hasn't the whole elevation dropped substantially?
Groins are really hard to describe.
Okay.
All right, so if you go back to the plan, and if you go out onto the site, if you walk up in this area here, which is up at the upper beach, you can see evidence of the groins buried,
Okay.
okay? When they were originally designed, based on that view, because I wasn't here when they were built, and the plan that we used, which was the 1950 whatever DPW contract plan, didn't show the amount of sand that was put on top of the groins when they were completed. But because of the amount of sand that's on them up here, it leads me to believe that they buried them to a certain extent. And then as time goes along and the storms get worse, it pulls that sand away, right? And as this moves back and exposes more of the groin up landward. So I think at some point, these were probably all buried down to a certain extent, but it's hard to say where because we weren't around. And they don't show it on their design plan.
Okay, thank you. I'm all set, thank you.
Okay. All right, I've got a number of comments. I think it's, from past comments, I think folks know I don't support beach nourishment below the mean high water mark. I think it has impacts to subtidal resources, intertidal resources. I think there's very few cases in the town of Harwich where I think we should support it. The commission hasn't supported it for, I think, probably a 10-year period. So the impacts I'm concerned about are those resources, not just shellfish, but all types of aquatic life in the intertidal zone that will be smothered, and you will have impacts that I think we haven't really seen much in terms of performance standards or description of what will happen to those resources. So I think that's something that we should see more of, but at the same time, I don't see myself supporting it. I think we've seen examples at Red River Beach maybe 12 years ago where some nourishment that occurred when below mean high water mark had impacts to subtidal resources. It's not our jurisdiction, but it happened at West Ennis Beach about 4 or 5 years ago, and there was substantial mortality of eelgrass, shellfish, and other aquatic life from the nourishment that just simply smothered the resources that were there. So I do feel we're looking at a fairly narrow private property benefit that will impact public resources. So I think it's important if folks want to go forward to have the Eelgrass Survey and look at those results, because it may not impact eelgrass if it's off enough distance, but I feel like the impacts to that intertidal habitat are not really supportable by our regulations. So that's why I do like Amy's idea of segmenting the groin work from the proposal to nourish below mean high water. So we don't have to vote tonight?
No, but you would need to kind of either continue to a date certain, or indefinitely continue, in which they would, when you're ready, you would re-notify abutters.
I don't have a problem with date certain, because with what I've heard from the commission, there's at least two things that we need to do.
Mhm.
One is the Eelgrass Survey,
Yep.
and the other is we'll have a wildlife expert chime in on the aquatic.
Performance standards, yeah.
Yeah.
So you would like a date certain?
Yep.
Okay.
People who are more knowledgeable than I about the life cycle of eelgrass,
Mhm.
when, I'm just looking at my calendar for dates, for when would it be a good time to do the survey? And then we can pick a date after that. And of course, if we're not quite ready, you can ask for a continuance then, but.
I think
Early
that-
June,
I
Brad?
think June through September, any time in that window is probably.
So what about this, what are the meetings in June?
3rd and the 17th, and you're looking at July 1st or the 15th.
So July 1st,
Fine.
because we'll do the survey near the,
In June.
in the middle of June. Then it'll give us time to plot all the data and everything.
Okay.
And get it to you in time for the July 1st.
Yep. Is that the date you want?
Yeah, can I ask if we had a relatively well-known person do some kind of matrix study of what's out there and would be able to chime in on that kind of thing that you're concerned about, Brad, would that assist?
I think it's, absolutely. I think other commissioners may not feel as strongly as I do, so I think that'd be very beneficial. And I think describing what you expect to happen, you know, through.
Well, we have somebody that we've already spoken with, that you're familiar with, that would be able to provide not only what's there now, a study of what's there now, and also what effect that might have.
Right,
Okay.
right. And I think then it's up to everyone to decide if they think that type of impact is supportable, you know, for.
Are we saying the groin work is also contingent on the survey being completed?
I don't feel that way. I think the groin work, they're entitled to repair their groin. I mean, ideally for me, in terms of resiliency, I'd like to see the groins disappear. But the property owner has a right to repair those groins, and so I think that piece is probably widely supportable. It's just a question.
I agree with you. I think the impact of reconstructing those is much less than introducing fill in an area you're not used to seeing fill. Because it is fill. Even though it's sand, it's still fill.
Right. In terms of the health of the beach, I think having the groins gone would be better, but I think they have a right to replace them. They have a right to protect, you know, their property in back of the groins. So, you know, I think that's kind of how I feel that. But, you know, the few times I've watched, you know, nourishment below the mean high water mark, there's been impacts. And, you know, we have not supported that, and I think our regulations make it hard unless there's areas where you've got just complete thick sand that goes out a long distance where you don't have a good established, you know, base of aquatic life living in that, the cobble and the gravel that's found there. So if it's really consistent sands, like you'll find, you know, Pleasant Bay, Cape Cod Bay, where you wouldn't really have an impact. And I think the fact that it is going to be short-lived as well, that sand will not stay there very long. So is it worth that short-term impact for an activity that's going to last 1, 2, you know, winter seasons? So,
So I don't know, are we being asked to sort of bifurcate this with nourishment and groins being two separate issues? Or do you want, are you
Not at
planning
this-
to do all
Not
at
at this
once?
stage. I think we need to provide you, I hear questions about what effect the sand will have on aquatic life. We can conjecture all day long, but I would rather have an expert find what's there, then through their experience, determine whether or not there'll be 10% mortality, 100% mortality as a result of the type of nourishment we're proposing. Because I've also heard, and I'd like to just make sure that we understand that we're not proposing 2.5 feet of sand in the nearshore area. If you look at the plan, the nearshore area, which is the mean low to mean high, it's 8 inches or less of material, so that we can establish the 10-to-1 slope. I'm not an expert on whether or not 6 to 8 inches affects aquatic life. I need someone to tell me that. So I hear you saying the same thing. But also just remember that we're not trying to make a massive amount of material in an area where it's sensitive. We're trying to grade it out to a very shallow slope, which is the slope of a natural beach. And we're confident that that would have less of an impact, but that's our slanted view of it because we want to do the project. So let's have an expert, you know, and I think they're pretty, she's very, you know, knowledgeable, also very impartial. That's at least what I've found, so.
yeah. It's not a common practice, you know,
No,
usually it's.
you're right, it's not.
you
It's
know,
not around here, Brad, you're right.
most of the nourishment's above mean high water, and I think for a very good reason.
Can I just make a comment based on what you just said?
Mhm.
That you're only proposing 6 to 8 inches of sand in the intertidal area. If you look at the contours that are on that plan, it looks a lot closer to 2 feet than 6 to 8 inches. I mean, you've got the existing contour, well, no, I'm talking about the plan on the other side. You're talking about,
I'll give you more sections because I disagree with you. The sections that we're showing right here, we can add 3 or 4 more sections through these areas so you can get a better idea. Because it's awfully hard to read a topographic plan with all those lines, even for me. In this area from here to here, which is the near shore, there's your mean high water line right there. That is not 2 feet. 2 feet is up here above the mean high water line.
what about a section between the two groins?
Sure.
I mean, you just look at the contours, and it's clearly a lot more than 6 to 8 inches.
I don't disagree with that, that up in this area here. Turn the plan around. Up in this area here, I agree. But remember where our mean high water line is here, and the near shore area is here.
Well, look at the contours. You've got a.
I'll do sections. Let's not argue about the contours on the plan, let's do a section. Section points it out much easier. Is that okay, John?
No, it's not, because I'm looking at the contours, and I believe I can read the contours.
That's great.
And you've got a 2-foot new contour over 0-foot old contour. So that's 2 feet, it's not 6 inches. And, yeah, you should run a section through that and show us a section.
Mm-hmm.
But if the section is consistent with the contours that are here, it's 2 feet, it's not 6 inches.
I'd still want to, if you don't want,
Sorry?
I
What?
still want to do the sections through there.
That's great. Love to see the sections, but I think it's
I think it'll
pretty
help.
obvious when looking at the plan.
Well, then if that's the case and there's an error on the contours, then that'll come out through a section view.
Great.
I rely on sections more than I do trying to interpret topo lines. Does anybody think of anything else they want added, since we're going to be continuing?
I would say if you could ask them to have some consideration with an alternative analysis on removing the groins. And if they don't have any interest in doing that, I think that's fine, but, you know, was that discussed with the property owners? They would have a nicer beach to have those.
It's already been discussed.
They didn't favor that, yeah. It would result in a nicer beach. You'd probably want to have to nourish more frequently above it.
Yeah, we're past that, Brad.
That's fine.
Because the narrowness of the beach and above mean high water does not afford the beach that they would like to have. If it doesn't meet the performance standards, and from your view, and it does from ours, then we have to do something
Okay,
beyond that.
that's fine, as long as, you know.
But it has been discussed, and we could, you know, yeah, that has been discussed.
Okay, very well.
Yeah.
Any other points or questions? Any comments from the audience? Okay, so I guess we're moving to continue to June 1st?
July.
July.
1st, okay. I make the motion, we move to continue to July 1st.
Second.
Seconded by Carolyn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Thanks.
While we have a minute here, folks, there is a sign-in sheet in the back of the room on that table. If you haven't already signed in, can you please do so? Yeah, I'll take that back, please.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is a notice of intent for 14 Mill Point Road, a proposal for a pier, ramp, and float. The applicant has requested a continuance to April 1st, 2020. I move that we grant that. Second by John. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And
Motion,
the reason, just in case there's people in the audience, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
that's fine.
In case there's people in the audience who are here for that one, the reason behind that is because the Local Waterways Committee has not approved that project yet, and it's going back to them on March 18th. Two local waterways, they meet at the fire station in the evenings, and then it will come to us on April 1st. It is our practice to not hear hearings until they've gone through waterways first.
Thanks, Amy. Okay, next we have a notice of intent for 39 Prince Charles Drive, proposal for a seasonal dock.
Good evening. Again, I'm John O'Reilly, representing the Deckers. We were here a few weeks ago. Had some discussion on the project to basically approve and license an existing dock that the Deckers had used for years. Commission had asked for some changes to it, and I've incorporated a revised plan that was dated February 25th, wherein there were two spur sections of dock, if you will, adjacent to the shore, and we just incorporated them into a new dock configuration, and the changes are basically the dock gets dock gets about 20 feet longer, 18 feet longer, excuse me, and the landing at the end is 72 square feet. So we've added we've added or incorporated those two spurs into the dock section. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Amy, any further comments?
They received a no-take letter from Natural Heritage stating that this project will not adversely affect the resource area. We are dealing separately with the homeowner on the cutting on the bank. So with the changes that you've proposed to the dock, I recommend approval of the dock.
Thank you, Amy. Any comments, starting with Jim?
No, other than that, you're moving forward with the violation or the dealing with that. I think the dock looks okay.
I'm fine with
Fine,
this.
Stan's good. Carolyn, any?
You're getting cooperation from the owner on moving
We've had
forward?
a little bit of back and forth, but we hope to get together soon on it. We kind of disagree on the cutting, and I've explained to them that it's not as per their order of conditions, so they will be, I will update you as we get further into that.
Did they reach out to you?
Yes.
I'm sorry, through the chair.
Yes.
Okay.
And I suppose we can't hold this up to
No, I
take
think
care
they're
of
two
that
very
since they
separate
are two
things, and this is
separate
an
issues.
existing dock that we're just trying to get permitted, and I think we should deal with the bank separately.
Okay, but if you could convey to them our concern,
I reached out to them the day after
Yep.
our last meeting, and they indicated that
They've
they
been in
would
touch. Yep.
call the office, and kind of head Amy off at the pass and
Yeah.
not have her call them.
I'm not ready to completely update you with,
okay,
everything yet,
Got it.
but yes, we are talking.
thank you. Mhm.
Mark?
No questions?
None? John?
No,
None?
dock looks reasonable, looks like
Okay.
you
Any-
took our comments into account.
Any comments from the audience? Would one of the members like to make a motion on the notice of intent?
I'll make a motion to approve the notice of intent for 14 Mill Point Road for pier, ramp, and float. Is that, am I the wrong one here?
Prince Charles.
39 Prince Charles.
39 Prince Charles, yeah. Seasonal dock.
Second, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Any abstains, or? Jim, did you vote?
Aye.
Okay, all right, unanimous? All
Thank you
set?
very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, can I just make one quick thing? So if anybody happens to be here for either 33 or 23 Snow Inn Road later on this evening, they've asked for continuations until March 18th. I just don't want anybody sitting here unless you have to,
Okay,
okay?
and are we announcing the next two together or separately?
We can talk, however you want to do it, John.
I think they are tied together, so you can announce them together, and we can
Yep.
start with one and
Yep.
go into
Okay.
the other.
Next, we have a notice of intent for 0 Old Campground Road, map 30 parcel C11, construction of a duplex, and also notice of intent for 0 Old Campground Road, map 30 parcel C12, also construction of a duplex.
Good evening. Again, for the record, I'm John O'Reilly. Sitting with me is Christian Davenport. He is the applicant. They are looking to construct 2 duplexes, one on each of these parcels. And what I'd like to do is maybe just quickly go through the resource areas, talk about the northern parcel, which is the C12, and then we'll get into the southern parcel, C11. First of all, this is Old Campground Road. It's off of Gilbert Lane. It's a little dirt path, dirt vehicle tracks coming off Gilbert. This is the northern lot. This is parcel 12. What we're proposing, starting up in this area, we have started to flag an overgrown cranberry bog, an old overgrown cranberry bog. It starts at flag number 1, runs through generally along the east side of the property, and we have flag number 10 for C12. And then again, we pick up flag number 10 for C11, and we continue down again along the eastern side of the lot, and then it takes a turn and runs along the southern border, south of the property for C11. The edge of wetland has been flagged. We've located it, and it's actually a small little bank that demarks the edge of the old bog. So that's pretty clear in the field. So with, as the notice says, we're looking to build a duplex home, two duplexes on the properties. The first is on C12. We have the duplexes shown
parallel to Old Campground. A majority of the actual house itself, or the structure itself, is outside the 100-foot buffer zone, with the exception of a small deck off the northern unit. The closest the deck gets to the resource in this area is about 88 feet, and we have held a limit of work line, which consists of straw wattles and a silt fence, just shy of 60 feet at its closest point at flag number 3 to the limit of work. What we have done is we've graded the lot so as to provide, one of the resources that are on the property is we do have land subject to coastal storm flowage, as set forth by FEMA, and we have a base flood elevation of 11, and that contour is shown in bold dash line, and again, it circumvents the backside of the property. Continues here, and you can see that it meanders quite a bit through the property. So this area of of C11 is within the 100-year floodplain. So on the 12 Old Campground, as I said, we have the duplex situated close to the road and running parallel with the road. In the back left corner of the site, we are encroaching within the 100-foot buffer zone. We are not proposing any work within the 50, and certainly no structures. The closest the structure is to the resource is 88 feet or 89 feet. We have graded the house so we can maintain a gravity feed to a leaching facility that is designed for the use of within the building. Driveways have been shown on either side. This type of house that Davenport has built is pretty typical of their duplex, where each individual would have their own structure and they would be connected by a utility shed, if you will. Going right into the southern property, number 2. Same setup as far as the house is concerned. It's a little different in the sense that it's not close to Old Campground Road, and the reason that it is pushed back onto the lot is because of the location of the wetland on the south side. It does come in, cross over into our property, and of course we have the 50-foot buffer that runs along the south side here, and where we pull the structure back to allow the driveway to come in off Old Campground, and we've positioned the structure to be about 70 feet away from the resource to the south. No structure is within 60 feet of the resource, and we are maintaining a limit of work line right along the 50-foot buffer at its closest point. We have done soil testing. Groundwater was found close to the surface, so that is the other main reason that we are adding fill onto the site and elevating the house so as to maintain a gravity feed to the leaching facility. Driveways are going to be pervious. Roof runoff is going to be handled by dry wells and downspouts and gutters and downspouts and dry wells, or stone trenches under the drip lines. And we are proposing all disturbed areas shall be just loamed and seeded with a drought-tolerant seed mix. And properties are served by town water. And that, in a nutshell, is both proposals. We have a lot going on both properties. But again, we honor the 50-foot buffer. We honor your 60-foot no structure on both sites. And I think at this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Amy, I'm sure you've got some comments?
I do. So maybe for ease of discussion, rather than bouncing back and forth in between the two, I mean, we opened them both up simultaneously, but maybe we should do number 12, the northernmost one first, and then go to the other one. So I guess for right now, I'll just comment on number 12, the northernmost parcel. And a lot of my comments are going to coincide with the other one as well. So, you have kept, first of all, we walked the site. I walked the site before it was fully staked and then after it was fully staked, so that was good. I do agree with your wetland lines, and I did check that depression, specifically on number 12, that depression that is on the site. I did not note that it was wetland.
This one or this one?
Maybe you can describe that a little bit more.
This one.
The bowl that you have on number 12.
Amy, can I interrupt for a second? I'm a little confused that, like, this site map says 2 Old Campground Road.
Yep, so we're looking at number 12. There's 2 plans.
There's 2 plans, and one is 12 Old Campground Road and one is 2.
Yep.
But on their requests, one was 12 and one was 11, I believe.
It's map and parcel, that's why.
Okay.
So one is addresses, which is 2 and 12, and the other is maps and parcels, so that's why it doesn't coincide.
Okay.
So we're looking at
We're looking at
12, which is the actual address, 12 Campbell.
12 Old Campground.
Yeah.
Okay, and that corresponds to that.
This was the area that Amy was just talking about. It's an old borrow pit, all well vegetated now, grown into. I did have Matt Farrell go down and take a look at this area. This was the first area he looked at. And there were some wetland species plants in there. And we did find groundwater within, I think it was 10 inches.
Oh,
But the size of it
okay.
is well underneath, I believe it's the local bylaws, 1,000 square feet?
It's 3,000 right now.
3,000,
So,
where did I get 1,000?
I don't know, not from us.
Oh, okay, well, it's well below 3,000. So, we did locate it, we did look at it. I don't believe it does qualify as a regulated wetland.
Okay. Well, thank you for looking more into that. I looked at the species and it looked about half and half up and wet. I did not take any soil borings when I was out there. But it is very small. So, potentially could be vernal, we don't know, but it's not state listed.
That's correct.
So,
Can I ask another question, sorry? If the size of this, do we just change our
nope, that's a town meeting vote.
town meeting vote? And if this project is not approved, if a project such as, that affects our new proposed
Yep.
Regulations,
Mhm.
it starts under one number and
Yep.
ends up under another number, which number holds?
The one that they filed under. So this one, it's when the date that they filed. If the other one's not active yet, if the other regulation or bylaw isn't, hasn't been changed by town meeting yet. Okay, so, for number 12, when you kept out of the 50-foot no disturb and you kept the structure out of the 60, the closest structure is 85. But our regulations do state that for disturbance within the 50 to 100-foot buffer zone to a wetland, the commission requires a minimum of 2-to-1 mitigation for disturbance. On a vacant lot, that's a really hard thing to do, if not impossible. I mean, we also looked at the lot, there's really no invasives out here either, so you can't even consider invasive management as mitigation here. So what we would look to do, what I would recommend, is looking to minimize your disturbance to the greatest extent practicable for what you want to do. And I think here, particularly number 12, that's without affecting the orientation of your structures, that maybe some minimization could happen if instead of filling and grading, that maybe you install a retaining wall farther up, something like that. I don't know if that's something you would consider in order to decrease or bring your limit of work much closer into your proposed structures, and while again minimizing your impact into the 50 to 100-foot buffer. And I know that these are kind of a standard design for a lot of your units, but even something as much as, can you move the deck to a different side? Can things be moved around a little bit so we can have less disturbance in the jurisdictional area? Because you can't meet that mitigation requirement, at least not that I see that you can. So I guess I won't go on to the next one just yet, but those are my comments for this one.
Thanks, Amy. And we would usually like to see calculations on the amount of square footage in the 50 to 100 that will be mitigated for.
Right.
And that would be helpful to just consider what we would look for if, in fact, there was something that could be mitigated for.
I do have those numbers if you, when you're ready.
Okay, all right.
Great.
Well, let's go around the table and see what folks are interested in. Jim, do you want to start?
Sure. So that would be my main concern. I haven't been supportive of projects without mitigation in the 0 to 100. And we are allowed to consider off-site mitigation. That's worked out for a few projects in the past few years. Or simply, this is one design of a possible project for this property, but obviously there's plenty of room for each property to hold, a home or a different project outside of the 100-foot buffer zone, so that's an alternative. So there's two paths forward anyway, of off-site mitigation or a change in project design to avoid unmitigated adverse impacts. So that's my comments on it.
No comments on that.
Stan?
Just a little bit of education on my part, related to the conservation side. I've never seen a duplex design like this, where it's almost like they're really two buildings. You've just got the connection of the storage area, as opposed to it's almost like two separate houses there,
Go
really.
to Fion's Way.
Pardon?
Go to Fion's Way in Harwich and take a look at them. Sorry.
No, so I was just,
We built several of these in the past few years in Harwich.
and that's,
It's a popular. These are for would be rental units,
right.
and they're very popular.
But the definition is a duplex there, even though it's just that really connection of the storage area. Just interesting.
I think why it meets the definition of a duplex is that you have two residential units that are connected.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, it's connected with utility room,
Right.
as opposed to the classic over, first floor, second floor, or side by side.
Townhouse, right.
And I mean, plus it's a shared septic and everything else too, so it's shared utilities per se, but just hadn't seen that before. That's all.
Carolyn?
As I'm looking at, I believe I'm looking at number 12, the only thing that is in the 50 to 100 is the deck, right?
And, well, part of the septic line, and fill.
No.
And the fill. That's the issue. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mark?
That's it.
On the work limit, starting at the north, coming around the corner and heading south, if there was a retaining wall at the 60-foot line and naturalization on the uphill side, wouldn't that be considered mitigation?
My interpretation of the regulations would be no, because it's in its native state right now, and to mitigate, it's really taking something that's impaired, in my mind, and improving it. So it wouldn't necessarily be mitigation. You'd be putting it back, is what you're saying. You'd be disturbing, but then you'd be putting area back to its natural state, which would take a couple years to establish. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Basically.
That's up to the commission if you consider that as mitigation. It's almost more like replacement.
Well, yeah, I guess
Yeah.
it's a play on words.
Right.
I'm just looking for an alternative to,
But you may not even, I mean,
Some
if that's the
restoration.
case, you wouldn't potentially, if you're gonna put it at the 60, which is essentially the work limit, they're not showing a retaining wall there, you wouldn't need a retaining wall if you were to put it at 60. I'm saying if you move that line, if you move that,
well,
But-
if there was a retaining wall at the 60-foot line, that would allow them to keep the same elevations and slope they have above it. And you still have some room for some planting on the uphill side of the wall, which to me would be of some benefit versus pushing the envelope right out to the work limit at the 50-foot line.
If I could just chime in as far as the work limit line and the grading, what we tried to do is provide a somewhat of a backyard. The level area behind the house, both units, is about 25 feet in the northern unit, which is within the buffer, is 25 feet before we get to a slope of 3 to 1. If we were to entertain a retaining wall or entertain a change in slope, go to a steeper slope, that's how you would get, there'd be no reason to put a retaining wall out at the 60 and basically fill to it, which would alter the topography more than what we're trying to do here now. But I think that it's important to provide some sort of backyard to the people that are going to occupy the home. And we've tried to hold that back, to 25 feet, which I think is a very modest backyard if you think about it. So I think, listening to some of the comments, Christian and I need to go back and take a look at, what we could do on that northeast corner of where the fill is. I mean, we're not going to get anything out of the 100-foot buffer. We're going to be in the 100-foot buffer. It's just a matter of, how much room we need to provide a lawn area and then provide a retaining system of some sort, whether it be wall or a steeper slope.
Well, the reason I suggested the retaining wall is then you could maintain the same slope above the wall. So basically just drawing in the toe of the slope, and that would keep everything else on the uphill side
Yeah,
the same.
that's exactly what a wall would do, is it would
Right,
bring your
exactly.
toe of slope or limit of work,
Correct.
landward, yes.
Yeah, because it wouldn't be that high. It'd only be a couple of feet high. So, a thought.
Well, we might be able to achieve the same thing and not have to put a structure that close. I'd rather do it with earth if I could, and maybe enhance the plantings along the slope. If you've noticed, I'm only calling for, drought-tolerant grass seed mix. I'm trying to keep it open. And I think that's where we could turn around and probably do something different.
Okay.
To get back to that, your thought about having it return back to a natural state. Obviously, drought-tolerant grass is not natural state, so.
Okay. That's all I've got on this one.
John?
What about runoff? I don't see dry wells or anything.
Well, the
because
dry wells, yeah, I don't show the dry wells on the plan, and how I cover the roof runoff is with a general note that it's either going to be addressed through gutters, downspouts, and dry wells, which would be strategically located within the work limit line, or if there aren't any gutters, we would have stone trenches at all the drip lines, so as to control any roof runoff and mitigate any washout.
Okay, I don't have anything else.
What is your square footage of new structure in the 50 to 100?
The new structure within the 50 to 100 is, I'm sorry, I didn't have that calculation, but it's really the deck. 10 by 16, so 160 square feet.
Okay.
Less than that because the deck is not completely within the 100.
And so our mitigation rules, Amy, they don't really address the fill, or do they?
Yeah,
Let
right.
me look. I believe it says disturbance.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily just structure, but let me look real quick. It'll take me a second.
I do agree with Jim's comments earlier. I think, when you come back, if you can have some ideas on what the square footage would be, and then what some options are for mitigation. And I think you mentioned plantings on the slope. There could be some native plantings that help reduce the encroachment, further over time. That might be something the commission's interested in. I'm not sure about off-site. That's difficult at times.
Says disturbance.
Okay.
Doesn't say structure.
So the fill would kick in as well. Which is-
Disturbed area.
Yeah, the amount of disturbance on 12 is, between the 50 and 100, of
Yeah.
course, is 3,200 square feet.
Okay. Yeah, so that's a lot.
On a 52,000 square foot lot.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It has been a dilemma for us.
Well, and keep in mind too what Jim said over there, I mean, your client here, I mean, is there an opportunity for offsite mitigation in Harwich and other properties that have wetland sensitivities there? Kind of like a trade. We are looking to adopt in lieu fees, to help with this issue that we have here, because we understand that on virgin lots, it's harder on virgin lots.
It's impossible.
I know, I'm just trying to.
You can't do it.
I know.
That's why I called you. I mean,
Yeah.
what am I gonna do about mitigation?
I
It
know.
should- it,
But that's why we're trying to look at ways that don't penalize vacant lots, but, we don't, or reward essentially highly developed lots that do have the ability to mitigate just because they've been highly altered for such a long time, so. Should have done it a lot sooner, but that is being proposed at town meeting this year.
Any comments from the audience? Could you,
Can you go, can he go?
do you mind, Chris, going to the podium? Thanks.
Thank you. My name is Christopher Hemian, and I own the property on the westerly side of Old Campground Road. I didn't really come here tonight in opposition of the project. I just came here tonight to find out what was being proposed, and I haven't had a chance to see any plans, or I have a better idea now of what they're proposing. I'm very familiar with the projects like up off of Queen Anne Road, and so I kind of have an idea of what's going on there now. But I just was wondering if it was possible just to take a look at the plan at some point. And
I'll give you a copy.
thank you very much. I probably should have come during the day to get one, but I've been busy.
I can give. So I can give you a copy of each. Yeah, we're always happy to provide you with copies. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay.
Can I ask one
Sure.
other question? There was some discussion about a retaining wall, John. Where would that be? Limited work?
Well, I think the whole discussion is focused on this corner.
Right,
On
yeah, I
this
understand
particular
that,
lot.
yeah.
So, the gentleman talked about putting a wall out at 60, where the limit of work line is. But here's the top of the slope.
Yeah, that's
And
what I
here's
was
a 3 to 1
gonna say.
down to the limit of work.
Yeah.
So when we talk about a retaining wall, where it would be most useful is somewhere in between the limit of work that's shown on your plan and the top of the slope that's shown here.
Okay. So it'd still be outside of the 60, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, the limit of work is 59.6 feet away, so it's just about 60 feet there. And, the structure is 88 feet, 89 feet away, the deck, the closest point. So we're talking about looking at this area for either enhanced plantings, reduction in grading, or quite possibly a retaining wall.
Yeah.
And I think, that's what we have to talk about.
Okay. Which would add to the issue of mitigation and that sort of thing too, I suspect, as it being a new structure within this 0 to 50, or 50 to 100.
But it would reduce disturbed area if pulling things back. So we have to see how that plays out.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, and one other question, you mentioned on the site, when we were at the site, these were two-bedroom dwellings.
I apologize. They're
They're
4-bedroom.
yeah.
There's 2 4-bedroom on each lot.
Okay, all right. And basements?
I have one follow-up here, which is there any reason you can't rotate things even just a little, even maybe just the northerly unit, just a little, to tip it a bit further away from the 100-foot? I mean,
It's your road setback.
well, it's further away than the,
Yeah, the setback is 25 feet from the road, and we're holding 28 feet from this corner here, and 36 feet from this corner. So, we can take a look at that.
there's 10 feet there.
I can do my math, yes, that's correct.
When would you like to come back?
2 weeks, 18th.
Okay. Okay, any further thoughts?
One other comment, just that this lot here has far less disturbance than the other lot.
Yeah.
Do you have a disturbance number on the?
Yeah, are we gonna talk about,
Yeah, I would say we're gonna do that
Are we doing separately?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know if we were.
Okay, yeah, I think the issues were different. Okay,
Yeah, the impacts, there's more to go on the other one, so,
So,
so we'll go on to,
sure. If you want, we can wait to vote on what most likely might be a continuance here too at the same time.
both, okay.
Sorry, John, I'm sorry.
yeah, well, I
Do you
don't
want
need a
us to-
crystal ball to know we're probably gonna continue this one too.
All right, I'm not trying to be rude.
Yeah,
I totally understand.
All right, so we're gonna kind of stop discussion on
Yep.
12 and go to number 2.
sure.
Go ahead.
I gave you a Reader's Digest version of 2 Old Campground. It's the same structure, different location in relationship to Old Campground, and the reason is because of the bog on the south side creeps north, if you will, and that 50-foot line jumps up into our lot much more significantly than the more southern part of the old bog. So we position the house as far north as we can, and here we do have a greater amount of disturbance within the 50 to 100-foot buffer. We are honoring the 50-foot buffer with the limit of work line. The closest the structure gets to the southern boundary, the southern resource is just shy of 71 feet. So I think a lot of the comments I heard for number 12, I'm going to hear again. But in this case, you know, we would really need to significantly modify the duplex layout here to move it, and we've held the grading on the south side of this house as tight as we can. We've actually gone to a 2-to-1 slope on the south side to retain that 50-foot buffer, no disturb zone. Septic system is very similar. We have 2 septic tanks. It's a gravity feed system to a leach field located in the northwest corner of this lot. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. I do have the disturbance on 2. And the total disturbance within the 50 to 100 on lot number 2, or house number 2, is 9,100 square feet, 9,100 square feet.
Okay. So my first comment is a similar thing in terms of minimizing, because it's hard to mitigate here. It's not impossible. So by doing that, I was kind of playing around with, you know, are you married to this exact view from the street? Instead, I don't think you'd have to change the proposed layout of the buildings or footprint of the buildings. It would be a little bit unconventional if you were to rotate this essentially 90 degrees counterclockwise and get most of it, if not all of it, outside the 100-foot buffer. You might laugh, I know, but it's a way, and I talked to the planning and building departments too to make sure that we're not impinging on any of their ideas. It's a little bit out of the box. It doesn't, you know, houses normally face the front of the road. Maybe you can speak to why it might not be a possibility, but it might require some more fill in certain areas. But is that a possibility you could look at potentially? I think if you played around with it, you might be able to get some backyard still, some side yard, and get the majority of the work, except maybe some driveway area outside the 100.
Yes to all of that. We can look at that.
I'm just asking you to look at it, that's all.
The intention here was to try to get street-facing structures. We do feel that, you know, we are, you know, we are honoring the 50-foot and the 60-foot respective setbacks. And, you know, we'd really like to try to keep it in this orientation if possible. Of course, if push comes to shove, you know, we'd have to take a look at that. And we just might, we'll end up adding this to the list of something we need to talk about.
I'll just leave it at that, either looking at ways to pull more of it or all of it outside the buffer if you can on this lot, because you have a big area. Or we can talk about, you know, minimization as well, like we did on the other side. So I'll just leave that.
Thanks, Amy.
Oh, and I should mention that neither of these properties in particular are priority habitat. Adjacent properties are, these two are not.
Do you know if these properties are coming under any other type of variance consideration with other boards?
I did speak with the health department, and I spoke with planning as well, and according to them, you know, they gave a review, and it meets all their regulations.
Yep.
Yeah, the sewage system is designed according to both the
Yeah.
state Title V and the local Harwich regulations.
Outside the 100-foot buffer with the septics
And the properties
no
don't,
variances.
I'm sorry, properties don't require any type of planning board relief or zoning board relief
Yep.
either.
No lot size considerations?
size.
Yeah, okay. Jim, any comments on this parcel?
Yeah, just the same issues, but a little more extensive on this property. I mean, this is a project that is proposed. There's certainly room on the property for a home or even a duplex of a different design outside of the 100-foot buffer zone. And that seems to be a very viable alternative. I could also support this with a fully mitigated with some sort of off-site mitigation that you could come up with. But other than one of those two things happening, I'm not supportive of the unmitigated impacts in the buffer zone. So those are my comments.
Okay. Ernie?
Jim said it perfectly.
Yeah? Stan? Okay.
I agree with Jim.
All right. Mark?
Yeah, I'd like to see some other ideas.
Okay, John?
Yeah, I'd say it's unanimous. And it,
Well, I'm glad we brought you all together tonight then.
isn't that why you came?
Why we live the dream, right?
Okay.
Can I just clarify, through the chair, was it, you could support the project if we met your expectations for off-site mitigation, or look at redesign the lot?
Either one of those things I'd be open to. Yeah, I can just see ways of even fitting a different design of duplex on this property. It would just have to be looked at a different way.
I just asked the question for clarity, so Christian has an idea of, okay, you know, what options do we have here as far as off-site mitigation or modification of the design plan?
For my personal interest, if there's gonna be the impacts, the mitigation just has to fully offset those impacts. So, you know, I'm open to different ways of doing that.
Any additional comments from the audience? No? Okay, well then, I guess we'll move to continue to March 18th,
Yes.
okay?
For both 2 and 12
Yep.
campground.
For both, I offer that motion.
Second?
Seconded by Mark, all those in favor say aye.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, would you mind, I'll take a few of those back, if you don't mind.
Need this one too, Randy, or?
I'll take them, just, yeah,
Yeah.
if you're not gonna use them, I'll
We're
take them.
gonna see, you might see something different.
We are, and I'm thinking, I mean, maybe other abutters might want copies.
Yeah.
But I think we're gonna see something different.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
We need that in lieu fee. We need that in lieu fee. No, it's gotta be performance standards. Okay, next on the agenda, we have a notice of intent for 3 Lincoln Avenue, proposal for an addition decks with mitigation plantings. Good evening.
Good evening, Dan Croto from Moran Engineering.
Katrine Higgins from Wilkinson Ecological Design.
And we have Kathy DeMeyer from Encore, the company doing the construction, and Steve, project manager for Wilkinson, I believe. So this project is, take the existing porch on the front of the house, on the north side of the house, and replace that with an addition of the first floor. And then in back of the house, the existing patio, the owners would like to do a deck there with a deck on the second floor also. The existing area is the brick patio and a lawn. The deck will extend is an additional 75 square feet, including the step around the deck. The back brick patio, to meet the new addition, is an extra 15 square feet. So to mitigate that, Katrine's group has created the plans and the mitigation, and she will take it from there.
Sure. Okay, thanks. So our proposal that's before you tonight, we're proposing mitigation that's spanning really the entire resource area on the property, within the resource area, both the coastal bank and the dune that's in the front there. And we're focused on invasive plant removal and native plant restoration in an effort to provide mitigation for the minor activities that Dan just described, the 90 square feet of increased coverage. So in terms of existing conditions, we're showing on our plan 1,500 square feet approximately of a project area, and that's on our restoration plan in that green shaded area. And that, if you were out there, you probably noticed that there's virtually just covered in Rosa rugosa with some bittersweet growing in that. And this winter when we did our site evaluation work, we really noticed that there's virtually no native vegetation growing in the area. It's a monoculture, especially of the Rosa rugosa and also the bittersweet. And as you know, the bittersweet is listed as a state, by the state as an invasive plant for its aggressive behavior. And then rugosa rose is also a non-native species. It comes from Eastern Asia. It is considered potentially invasive by the state for its tendencies in some regions and habitats of Massachusetts. It definitely has the ability to displace desirable native vegetation, and you can see that it's successfully doing that here. And the Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management, CZM, states that that Rosa rugosa is less effective at controlling erosion compared to native species, and it can actually worsen erosion as it precludes other species that are more effective at controlling erosion from growing because it outshades the grasses that should be growing here instead. So we're proposing to remove the rugosa, remove the bittersweet, all by hand. We would be then seeding the bank and blanketing it with erosion control, biodegradable erosion control blanketing. And we would plant American beach grass as identified on our plan. Immediately, if this project was proposed, we would do all that work at once. And then once the invasives, the bittersweet and the Rosa rugosa, were to be effectively managed, we would then plant according to our plan. We're proposing beach plum and rose, and then seaside goldenrod and little blue stem also. So the shrubs and the additional grasses and herbaceous species would provide a diversity that is not there now with that monoculture of Rosa rugosa. And also hot off the press, I just talking, our team here, we realized that the client's also interested in removing about 200 square feet of a privet hedge that is existing along the eastern property line. And it's a very thick hedge and tall hedge of privet, which is a non-native species. Also has the tendencies to act as an invasive species, especially on the Cape. And so that, we would like to include that with this proposal, removing the privet and replanting with something like sweet fern or black chokeberry or rose, Carolina rose. We haven't really figured that out yet, but I talked to Amy about that. So that would be an additional 200 square feet of non-native plant removal to increase the square footage that we're proposing for mitigation to 1,700 square feet of non-native plant removal and plant restoration, native plant restoration. So when you look at what were the mitigation ratios, it is a roughly 19 to 1 ratio of hardscape or proposed activities versus what we're offering for mitigation, 19 to 1 ratio of mitigation. So I think really the important thing and I'll summarize and just end with this, is we're proposing to take an area within the resource area. It's actually the resource area. It's currently a non-native monoculture, and we're proposing to add diversity to that in order to strengthen the resource area for stormwater management and also for value of habitat available for wildlife. And it's really the root systems, the variety of root systems that our planting plan that is proposing. The different root systems all act in different ways. So right now you have just one root system of the rugosa, and we're proposing variety of plants which will add this different structures of roots to allow for better stormwater infiltration. You know, the root system of the beach grass to the little blue stem to the beach plum is all really necessary to have that diversity of root system to really help stormwater management, to allow the water to infiltrate right there without becoming runoff. And it also will help with habitat available for wildlife. Things like the beach plum will just, you know, strengthen the wildlife or the habitat that's available for pollinators earlier in the spring, and then birds that are migrating in the fall with the berries, for example, with the beach plum. So with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Amy, any thoughts for us?
I think it's very minor what you're asking to do in terms of hardscape. It's really squaring off edges on the patio. Yes, you're having a couple with and you're adding, it's going to be decks, one on top of the other, correct? But one on, yeah, and so I think that's, in terms of disturbance in the buffer, it's very minor compared and what you have right now. Your existing porch becoming livable space, that's kind of on the road and land side of the house. Don't think that's a big issue. We did talk on site and with Wilkinson and state that, you know, that they're going to have to conform to the no chemical application other than if they were to be approved to use an herbicide, which I don't, for rugosa, are you proposing just to manual or with a machine mechanically remove?
We would be proposing herbicide, something
okay.
like triclopyr would be.
Okay, so with the exception of invasive management, that there would be no chemical application on the lawn areas, or just the vegetation. So in terms of the mitigation, or what I would say restoration, almost, more so than mitigation, because I don't think what you're proposing really is going to have much a negative impact for the hardscape. It really is, in my mind, restoration. You have a stone wall which is acting as a coastal bank. Below that you have a dune, and then their property ends and becomes town property. There's a kind of an old fence approximately on the property line there. So it's between the fence and the wall that you're talking about. I like the diversity of species because it's a dune habitat. You may not want it completely chock-a-block full with all shrubs. So a mix that they've proposed, the roses and the beach plum, is good. I might even suggest swapping a couple of those out and putting a bayberry or two in there as well for added diversity. But I think the multiple layers of the different grasses and forbs, the goldenrod with the shrubs is appropriate for dune. And on the side, I'd be all for removal of the privet and replacement with like-kind native plant species, potentially if they were even interested in eastern red cedar. As more, because it could be more of a blocking thing from abutters if they were interested. But if they were just interested in sweet fern, black chokeberry, roses, beach plum, and bayberry, that would be amenable to myself as well. So I would recommend approval with the exception of maybe switching one or two of the other things out to bayberry.
Thank you, Amy. John, can I start with you now?
Sure, it seems like, I agree with what Amy said. It seems like fairly minor changes to the structures you're talking about, and a great enhancement to the property within the 100-foot buffer, so I'm all for that. One question, what is triclopyr and why use that rather than glyphosate?
We tend to use both. We use both in very limited amounts. I know there's a lot out there and people reading a lot, especially on Facebook, about glyphosate, and some of it might be true. A lot of it, I feel, is not true. But we thought that this project is it's appropriate to, based on the species, the plant species, that you could use triclopyr and on these plant species. You can't use triclopyr on grasses, and so it would be appropriate for here. For this project, triclopyr would be perfect in very limited amounts. So we're not advocating spraying or anything, but it would be just very targeted amounts of the chemical to get rid of the plant and then start fresh with native species.
Okay, thank you.
Developing the plant communities you're talking about, I think it's a great idea. I think it's a very positive thing. Overall, I don't see any particular impact otherwise. I would be in support of the project.
Bill?
I'm a little concerned about the deck and second floor deck, where right now there is only a ground level brick patio. This is just a little bit more of a structure within the 0 to 50. So with all the very nice mitigation that is being done, I might like to see some statement in the order of conditions that this can never be turned into a living space, such as they're taking a porch here and turning it into living space.
Yeah, we wouldn't have any issue with that.
Thank you. Dan?
And I just want to confirm the other porch that you're enclosing is the same footprint? It's not larger in any way?
Correct, it is the same footprint. It is a new structure, though.
Right, no,
It's-
but it was the same, it was a
Same
question
footprint,
out there,
yes.
if it was exactly the same footprint or not.
Yes, and there is a change in the brick patio shown on the proposed site plans is correct. There is an error in and I pointed this out to Kathy at Encore. On the proposed first floor of the architectural plans, they give us the dimensions of what's out there for an existing fence, and they just have a blanket statement for bluestone patio in the middle without showing the limits of the patio. So it almost looks like that whole area is proposed to be patio. It's that same exact statement on the existing conditions architectural plan, but there's no change. There's no change to the brick patio except to go up to the existing porch, I guess. doesn't sound like anybody caught there, but, but so when we're looking at that front porch, the site plan is the correct patio layout. There's a slight, it just doesn't, on the architectural plan, it doesn't actually do the edge of the blue stone patio, if anybody is looking at that page. And I did submit these plans to the board, and that's why I bring it up. But just so no one's confused, the site plan is what we're or dimensions of what we're asking for approval for on the brick patio. I only
So-
bring that up, Stan, because you had brought up that area.
Now that you've done that, so is that additional patio?
No, I'm saying there's a it's not descriptively drawn on the architectural,
We're not
but the edge of the
changing
patio.
any square footage?
Correct. Well, let me say that again. There is 15 square feet added to that patio, and that's part of that 90 square feet total. So that front patio, it's 15 square feet. The back deck is the 75 square feet,
Gotcha.
which was the
So it's
numbers.
still
that-
the 90 in total, is what you're talking
Correct.
about. I'm sorry.
Just one question, I noticed there's a snow fence at the bottom of the planting area, on the beach side of the planting area. Is it just here, are you planning to replace that?
You're talking about the snow fence that's right along that you were talking
Property
about?
line,
Yeah.
pretty much.
We wouldn't be replacing the snow fence. We're not,
Not?
no.
Okay.
I mean, we'd remove it, I would think, assuming
Remove it.
it's on this property and not the town property, but,
Okay,
yeah.
all right, so just as far as the timing of the removal, I assume you'd remove it before you start the planning work.
If you find that it's on our property, let us know.
Okay.
We don't know where it came from.
It looks like it was probably put there to maybe dissuade people who are on the beach from coming up.
Yeah.
That's all.
You're up, Jim?
Yeah, I got a couple of comments. Is there a certain amount of square footage of lawn that's gonna actually be transitioned to planting? Or is that the same footprint essentially?
It's the same footprint.
Same footprint. So maybe the privet removal, how many square feet did you say?
200.
Okay.
And there is lawn, if you took the privet and kind of squared it off and where we would be planting, there would be some lawn removal in that area that would occur. Because the lawn is going right up into where the privet's growing.
Okay. Because a lot of times we don't consider the invasive removal as, mitigation exactly for increased structure in the 50-foot buffer zone, but at least there's some actual additional planting area happening. And then the other thing was the lawn regulations. Fully understood that is no fertilizers at all, and any reseeding has to be with native seed mix. So it'd be,
Would that be specified in the order?
that would be, yeah.
And we did tell Kathy,
Yeah,
who
yeah.
spoke
Talked
with the
about it.
owner about that.
That's all for me.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Just to follow up with Jim's comments, I'm a member who does feel that the invasive plant removal really doesn't qualify, in my mind, for mitigation in many cases for new structures in the 0 to 50. In this case, there's so much work going on, it's hard to make the case that increase in footprint would really cause impacts beyond some of these improvements here. So it's a tough one to really make that statement. I think along Jim's comments, if you could show in the plan where the lawn would be pulled back a little bit around the privet, my guess is it might come close to 90 feet by 3 would be mitigation requirement.
Yeah, I mean, my and maybe some other members, I think there is some value to the removal of all the rugosa rows, but I agree it's not purely mitigation. So if you're you said the privet area is 200 square feet, but there's also additional area immediately around it, you could probably get to that 270 or whatever that technically is that 3 to 1 for the 90 square feet. Or 75, is it 75
We have
square feet?
75 in the 0 to 50.
Yeah.
And we
So I
have
think just
15 in the,
it would be fairly easy
51.
if that was the purview of the board to purely
Yeah, I'm
do
just,
it that way.
I think there's a lot of benefit to what's proposed here. I think, I just wanted to make the statement, it kind of echoes Jim's feelings, that there have been times when new structures in 0 to 50 are put forward with the idea that they're going to mitigate for invasive plant removal.
I agree.
And I think there are times it's really not a suitable strategy. In this case, I think there's a lot of benefits here, but if there was some documentation of lawn removal that went along with it, I think that would be a real benefit to the property.
I mean, if you could provide a revised plan showing where the privet is gonna be removed and give a square footage of that and the adjacent, nearby lawn area that would be removed to put the new plants in.
Okay, and then switch out some bayberry.
It's just a suggestion.
Yeah, no, it's a good one.
It can only be a couple, that's fine.
Yeah.
We have been sticklers at times, for just no new structure, no new disturbance in the 0 to 50. I think this has net benefits overall, so I think we're all grateful for the effort. Any further comments on this? Any comments from the audience?
Are we talking about approving it with these minor changes to be handled by Amy?
Sure.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Showing.
Bringing our lawn regulations
Yep.
into play.
Should we clarify that?
Good.
I guess we do have a question as in, so the revised planting plan would show how much lawn removed? Or is there
Well,
is there
That
a
general
limit?
area,
It's the privet, you said about 200 square feet of privet,
right.
so the privet area and the little bit additional around it that you said would have to be removed.
To get to what square footage? Because it probably would be like
225.
225, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just
And
to
that could be a
document it in
plan
the
that you
plan.
provide, just, I don't think we need a continuance or anything.
Right, we could do that this week.
Yep.
Right. Okay, any further comments? Any comments from the audience? Okay, do we have a motion from the table?
Move we approve the notice of intent for 3 Lincoln Avenue, Barnum and Elizabeth Dolan.
Okay.
Second?
I don't think there's any modifications we need to add to this, right?
No, lawn regs,
I'll add it all.
that minor change. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
So, what is next?
We gotta technically
Open,
open Harwich and actually, I would say open it, I'll give you a quick update and
Okay.
then continue.
sure. Next, we have notice of intent for 33 Snow Inn Road, proposal for emergency repair to existing bulkhead. And related, we have a notice of intent for Wichita Harbor Club, 23 Snow Inn Road, emergency repairs to existing boathouse and accessory structures. They've requested continuance until what date, Amy?
March 18th.
March 18th, and I move that we grant that.
The second?
Second that, all those in favor?
Aye.
The reason behind that is at the last meeting, Brad in particular had asked for square footage of, what was the area behind the wall, Brad?
Mm-hmm.
So they are proposing, I mean, what they have on a plan is what they're supposedly doing. The in-water work is to be finished on by March 11th. So it just made sense at this point to kind of have them do almost an as-built at that time to get those numbers. So I think that we continued last time based on that request, and they're just not quite there yet. So I did ask for Don to give us an update on where they're at, and he gave me this email this afternoon. So they have finished the sheet pile installation on the north by the Amalgamated Building, which is kind of the Helfrich building. Finished in front of Vin's and finished, so the Amalgamated Building is actually the structure just to the north of the Helfrich property that they were going to tie into. Finished in front of the Helfriches and finished installing the timber piles in the boathouse. They will be finished with the remaining steel sheets by Wednesday of the 11th, but may be finished sooner. They still have work replacing Helfrich's deck above the sheet pile, but all in-water work will be done by the 11th, if not sooner. Also, Brendan from Chapter 91 issued the Chapter 91 emergency repair authorization. So they seem to be on schedule.
Mhm.
Is there any questions you have that I can relay to them between now and then?
Did you guys float around mitigation options for that habitat, or just waiting
We
to
have
see,
not yet.
waiting to see what it is?
Well, we didn't know what it was yet
Yeah.
necessarily,
Okay.
yeah. But I will make sure they keep that in mind.
Amy, I had a question on the bulkhead, your comment particularly at Witchmere, are proposed to be washover bulkheads?
Mm-hmm.
Would that be to the east of the building? Remember they
It's
were
not gonna extend farther out into the channel at all.
not gonna extend,
No.
that will be he indicated to us when we visited there that will be another request later coming down?
Not to extend farther out into the channel, but they are considering asking to continue the bulkhead going south as you're heading towards the exit of the harbor, along the base of that whole building.
But they had to go out 3 feet because of the overhang of the building.
They're not.
They're not.
They're not allowed to go any farther into the channel.
How are they gonna
They're
put
gonna-
that in then?
Rock.
Rock? How are they gonna put that in then? He said he couldn't drive it with that overhang.
They're not going around that corner.
They're
That's
not
what he
going
told us
around the
when-
corner, they're
when we were
stopping
there.
before the corner. They're stopping before the corner.
Oh, so they're not going into
Sorry,
the channel
yes,
at all?
they're- no.
Nothing on the channel side?
Not under this permit. Done-
Okay,
Yeah,
right.
sorry, yes.
Okay.
So the overwash is not under this permit?
Yeah, well, it is, because the portion under the portion underneath the Winchmere building is overwash.
Okay.
To the north
Yeah, the north.
On the
end.
north side of the Winchmere building.
is an overwash bulkhead.
And is that new? No, okay.
It's a full, above everything in Helfrich and let me check the boathouse, I don't want to misspeak, but.
Yeah, so land under ocean will be altered landward of that.
Yeah,
And that's what
right.
we're talking about for mitigating.
Right. Okay,
Is that gonna be adequate? Are they coming back with a new proposal for the channel side of that building? What are
they
gonna-
are, from what I understand, considering that. I haven't seen any,
I just wonder how
drafts.
durable the overwash bulkhead's gonna be on that one northern side, if you're gonna have all the backwash
the
coming up on
reason
the other
that
side.
they only did this portion is because it was done under an emergency order. And you
Yeah.
can only do what is the most minimally needed to abate the emergency. So at this time, the entire thing didn't need to be done, so they couldn't make the argument that we need a new thing under the entire Winchmere.
Okay.
Okay, so
Okay.
we're continued, March 18th seems like it might be busy.
This meeting seemed like it was gonna be busy too, and then things moved.
Oh, boy. Okay.
You wanna just go down in order of things?
Yeah.
So we got order of conditions for Margaret Sharon.
You have an issue on item number 5 on the bottom of that.
Okay, let me get it. What did I miss?
Something's left off, I think. You say, after the water, it is made of native stone or shell and encompassed by untreated timbers.
Untreated timbers as per DEP, as per the previous,
But,
I
yeah,
alerted to the other permit.
Yeah, but prior to that, it says that is made of native stone or shell.
Or
and-
shell.
and B
It's supposed to be
encom-
shell, not shell.
Or shell, oh, okay, all right, thank you.
typo. They did provide me with a hand sketch of meeting the 100 square feet, so I gave them the okay for that, and they'll be putting that on the as-built, so. They were able to make it work for them.
Folks can let me know when you're ready. I have no comments on.
I have no comments.
I'm good.
Okay. Well, if somebody wants to make a motion on the first order?
Move to approve the order of condition for 168 John Joseph Road, seasonal dock.
Second.
Seconded by Jim. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion
Please
carries.
sign. The next one is for Elizabeth Maher at 48 Harbor Road. Order of conditions.
And number 5 again, you have the word outlines. I think it's just a typo, should be outline.
Yep. This one, number 5. So projects like these where it's really large-scale restoration, I'm trying to remember to put in that if any other company other than who proposed it, in this case Blue Flax Design, is to carry out the work, that they need to prove to the commission, or myself at least, that they're capable of carrying out the work, and that would really be a portfolio of successful projects they've done. You know, not any landscaper can do what was approved here successfully.
Just out of curiosity, oh, sorry.
Do you have a list in the office of approved companies, or?
We can't recommend people. I do have a list, well, I have a list of area contractors, but I don't split it up. Well, one, it's not a, I can't recommend anybody, but also, it's a list, the list that I do have is pretty huge, and it also, it doesn't discriminate between, okay, well, maybe these people are people who just cut lawns and trim shrubs versus people who do large-scale restoration, so.
Had a question on the bank there. I wasn't involved with this hearing or the site visit, but was there any bank stabilization going on, or just all plant work?
Yeah, they are proposing to, because it has eroded and scarped, and when the, you can have a copy of the plan if you want to see it, it's beautiful. It's, actually, this is probably the best thing for you to have here. They're proposing to add a little bit of fill to even that slope back out, replant it, and then actually do some high marsh plantings as well. But you can have this if you want to take a
Yeah.
look and see what they did.
It strikes
They're
me as
proposing.
a bank that is naturally eroding, as it should. And it does have some trees and some canopy there, so I hope they can get back to that, you know.
They're proposing a lot of trees.
Yeah.
It's not eroding because of wave action, it's eroding tidally a little bit.
Right.
It's not a high erosion rate, but it's been eroding faster because the trees that were growing on it were invasive poplar trees, which have really poor root systems. And they've just toppled and brought the bank with
Yeah.
them,
There were a
so.
few cherries though, right?
Oh, they said, I mean, they're pretty compromised with the bittersweet, if there's anything there.
Yeah, I tie my skiff off to a cherry that's right there, but it is,
It might be also be on town property, because town and hers is right there,
yeah,
yeah.
Yep.
They're gonna try to save whatever they can that is native.
right?
But there's, then what was nice is they did provide all the layers, from ground covers to shrubs to canopy layers.
Yeah.
Not asking to do anything else under the property, then
Mm-hmm.
take care of this, which is nice.
Yeah, they're showing some good-sized trees.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just as a aside to Carolyn's comment about providing lists to people, all the companies I used to work for, the council always took the position, if you provide a list, not recommendations, but a list of at least 3 entities, then that was acceptable and
Sufficient.
didn't constitute a recommendation. And of course, gave them they could use whoever they want to, but that was just
Right.
people that we've dealt with in the past ourselves.
So that I do have that list, and it's, at least, there's a lot on that list. I've been told both things. I've been told, well, it's more than 3, so that's fine. And I've also been told, well, you're not including, I pretty much included like everybody in this general area, but there might be a few left off who maybe have violated several times with us.
Mm.
So I've been told that that is discriminatory.
As long as
I
you get
don't
the
know.
number, you
Yeah.
meet the number test, I don't think it's discriminatory.
All right.
Do we have a motion for this?
Just one other small comment on number 4. I'd like to see that language in about any reseeding of lawn
Yep.
area would be with native grass seed. It's for consistency from order to order.
Mm-hmm. Okay, if someone wants to go ahead with a motion?
You know, isn't that number 7 though?
Oh, is it? Oh.
Reseeding of the
I thought I
lawn.
put it in there.
It is in there, yeah, it just wasn't combined with the line.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I think
Okay.
they're similar but 2 different things.
All
One's a
right,
chemical
no, you
application.
got it, so sorry.
No
Yeah.
worries.
I'll make a motion to approve the order of conditions for, where are we at, 48 Harbor Road for vegetation management.
Second.
Seconded by Ernie. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Please sign. Jeez.
I want to wake us
In
up.
case you're wondering, that's a really heavy-duty water bottle. We got a request for a cert for 22 Wawatezi. This was one with hardscape and landscape modifications on Allen Harbor. We did the site visit, both Nikki and I, and work was done in compliance with the order, except for the lowest rungs on the kayak rack are not the required 2 feet above grade. This is easily fixed, and the reason we wanted that is that there would be no shading or scour to the dune vegetation that was around there. So I've talked to the contractor, and that's something that can be fixed very quickly. And it's just the lowest rungs on the kayak rack. Other than that, the plantings have been in for over 2 years now. Work was done by Wilkinson. Everything is establishing beautifully. Really, once you step off that deck there, it is completely naturalized. There's no lawn. It just goes into natural dune vegetation. So it was done right. I recommend a certificate of compliance for them with the ongoing conditions of no, actually, let me see if that was a condition back then. Can't really put new conditions on, but. We didn't have back then the no chemicals.
Okay, do we have a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the certificate of compliance for 22 Wawatesi Road, hardscape and landscape modifications.
Seconded by Ernie. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion
Yes, sir.
carries.
Okay. I wanted to update or give you a update on 51 Dunes Road violation. So I wrote it out for you, but just to recap, we were made aware that there had been some tree cutting in the dunes in the vicinity of 45 and 51 Dunes Road after the fact. So we visited the site and we found that approximately 30 pitch pines had been severely pruned or flush cut. We noticed track marks from the machine and drag marks from the dune leading to the driveway. So we actually spoke with and this is at 51 Dunes. The landscaper of 45 Dunes happened to be there and kind of called us over, and just really wanted to say that he, himself had no part in any of this. So the cutting was actually done on association property, completely. There was some cutting on the property of 51. I mean, the dunes that were actually overlooking, or the trees that were overlooking the channel were essentially cut in half. They're not going to be functional trees in the future. So in the dunes, and I actually didn't count those, maybe 4 or 5 in the total of the 30. The 30 that I counted were in the dune themselves. A few of those were ones that had been cut in half, but not completely. It's kind of strange that some were cut in half and other ones completely flush cut to the ground. So stuff that was flush cut on the ground ranged anywhere in between 1-inch caliper, so not technically a tree necessarily, but up to 6 to 8-inch diameter trees. They're all pitch pines. Oh no, I'm sorry, there was 1 or 2 cedars. And because it was on association property, it was pretty obvious kind of who would benefit most from this opened view. For all intents and purposes, every tree in front of this house looking out to the sound was removed or cut. I spoke with the homeowner because, you okay? Spoke with the homeowner because I've spoken with her on numerous occasions regarding erosion on the harbor side of her property, and she did admit that she had her landscaper do it. I tried to get the name of the landscaper out of her, and she wouldn't budge on it. She said she took full responsibility. I tried to explain that, I mean, this isn't like a questionable, is this a wetland resource area? This is so obvious, and that company is just as much liable. So I'm really hoping we do somehow find that out. She's in Florida until April. I did meet with her son, who is also listed as owner on the property. He lives up outside of Boston. And my recommendation is really my recommendation is we need to have them restore this habitat. You can also fine, that is your right to do so. The reason for this clearing was to improve a view. I think the proper thing to do is have them replant this property, and I would recommend, it is a dune habitat, so you don't want to see it completely forested. If you went out to the site, there's lots of beach grass, heaths and heathers, bearberry. You want to maintain that, but also add back in the tree species, and I would recommend predominantly eastern red cedar here. Of a smaller height, they do better when they survive better when they're planted smaller, so I'm talking 4 to 6 footers. I told her that's what I was going to be recommending, and she said she would be cooperative. And that would have to be done this spring.
Thank you for that, Amy.
But it is up to you if you want to take my recommendation or change it.
No, I appreciate it. It's not easy work. How do folks feel about both Amy's recommendation and the fine structure?
I think this one, the fining might be important. So what's the maximum fine per tree? Can you do 300 per tree, or?
Technically, per incident, it's 300 per incident, and you could say that each tree could be deemed to be an incident.
I think it's important to have a pretty stiff fine, because basically, from their perspective, the cedars, if they survive, aren't going to grow fast, and they're going to get their view back,
Right.
essentially. Mission accomplished. Cut down the trees, get their view. So it's important to not promote that type of activity in the
I agree.
resources. I mean, I think that we should have them do the replanting. I mean, I haven't seen great survivability of cedars planted in dunes. They do great when they start there naturally, but I've
Yeah.
seen under,
Replant is tough.
under
I just don't know what else to
50%.
plant there.
and you gotta, water them and everything.
I told them that would have to happen.
Yeah, so, I mean, if someone good really takes care of them, they might make sense to mix in some shrubs as well, but, I think the fine is really important on this one too, a significant fine as a deterrent, but-
Yep.
Another alternative with the cedars would be to use smaller ones, 2-gallon, 3-gallon plants.
So even smaller than the 4-footers.
Yeah,
Just go
even
real
smaller, give them a chance to survive.
I gotta agree
But
with
do
Mark.
A larger volume, because you're gonna have some loss.
Yeah,
So account for the loss, say you're gonna lose 50%,
Yeah,
put in 45 rather than 30.
okay.
but we just don't, then, for a relatively low cost, they really accomplish their mission of. So I think
do
the
agree.
fine is really important on.
And if they came to us, Amy, it would be notice of intent, right?
Right, and I did explain to her, I said you most likely would not have been able to remove everything. You might be able to, if you had a thick stand of pitch pines and you wanted to improve your view marginally, or, you might be able to remove a few. But we don't do this panoramic
Right.
really views anymore. It really had a big impact to the habitat that's
But it
there.
also wasn't on their property.
Wasn't on their
Nor did they
property.
have permission to do it, so.
The association is aware, from what I understand. I did not tell the association, but it has been told to me that the association is aware and they will be discussing it.
Right.
So obviously I'll keep them in communication because this is going to be on their land.
How do we
The
approach
other
a
thing
fair
that troubled
fine?
me when looking at this was, aside from the fact it wasn't on their property, which I think is particularly egregious, but it's obviously wasn't the first time it's been happening.
Yeah, there's been a few
I
other
mean, there
cutting
were some
events there.
8-inch clear, flush cut stumps out there already, that, it's been an ongoing thing for a number of years, I think.
Yep.
So the fact that we caught them this time, I think, was fortunate, because they really decimated it out there. So, yeah, I like Mark's idea of putting overkill on it and, applying the fine per tree.
What I would request is, I would like to the opportunity to go back out there and just recount. So if you were going to do per tree, you can say that, but just don't say over 30 trees, because I would like to go recount that. I think I was a little conservative.
Include the ones on the side of the house as well, then.
If that's what you want me to do, yes, I can.
Is there a break off on diameter that you consider to?
Well, we consider, let me find our regs here.
Variety is pretty broad.
Yeah. 300 times 30 that's a big fine. We have not had a fine that large.
Well, but think of this,
I
Brad,
was-
that she won't give us the name of the contractor, otherwise we'd find both the contractor and her.
Right.
So I
Yep,
think
I
what
agree.
we're effectively doing is levying the contractor's fine on her.
Yeah,
So I have no reservations about
that's
that
good.
severity.
A notice of intent could cost her $5,000-8,000, or is that something that makes sense, or
A notice of intent wouldn't have cost her that.
if she had consultants prepare it with
Oh,
plans?
yeah.
you
Well,
know?
it's unlikely that we would, allow that sort of cutting
No, we
on
wouldn't.
dunes,
No, we never would have.
I mean, that's in the resource area, you
Yeah.
know, so.
So,
Well, you know what, I support it because we're not really moving the needle on this topic. You know, we're really not having a big impact. It keeps happening. This may bring them in to talk to us about it, and then maybe we can find a way to find the contractor as well. It will be
So-
a big fine.
I just want to say that we shouldn't, I wouldn't like to view this as we're disposing the situation by thinking about levying the contractor's fine on her, because I think we should continue to attempt to find out who the contractor is and plan to levy the stiffest possible fine on the contractor when we discover
Well,
who that person is.
but I would, and I think
I'm
it's
not-
up to Amy how she wants to characterize this, but I wouldn't be reluctant to tell her that the amount of the fine was in part because she won't disclose the name of the contractor. I mean, that's on her.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we can spend our time and effort and Amy's scarce time and effort trying to find the contractor, but if we can't, you know, I think this levying the fine on her with that proviso is entirely appropriate in this case, given the fact it wasn't even her land.
I suspect there are some disgruntled neighbors who know very well who the contractor is, and that would be a way to find out.
Perhaps.
we'll
You got
kind
a
of
lot
let
of them in that
things
area, I think.
unfold a little bit with that. What was I gonna say?
I have a
Wait, I
question.
haven't-
Oh, you have the
I'm
comments.
still waiting for my turn.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
No, I was gonna say, you know, when I went out there, you know, we're getting more and more episodes where ignorance of the law or the rules is coming into play. It seems to be more and more frequent. This one is a prime example. It's not a new homeowner. It's somebody that's been there a long time, should know the rules by now. Has worked, I believe, he said, for other things on her property, has consulted with you.
Not on vegetation
Okay.
or the house, but
But she's
regarding
aware that she's in a
the
wetland
channel.
or a conservation area.
She claims that she was not aware that she needed a permit for removing vegetation, but
Property.
I know,
That was
I know,
amazing.
it's,
I
I
can't get-
know, I'm just saying, she has not been,
Right.
she hasn't had any admin reviews for tree removal, put it that way, she hasn't.
But the fact, and I agree, that was, I can't blow my mind, you know, that blows my mind that you would go out on other people's property, whether it was the association or even when we were going through, it looked like some of the cuttings were dragged through the next door property owner's property to get it out of there. I don't know what the association is thinking in terms of this. I'd be curious as to what they're
Well,
going
they're
to
kind
do.
of curious what we're gonna do, I think, first.
Okay. And I like Mark's idea, because I was gonna say the 30 doesn't, I mean, because there was some additional penalty, but if it makes sense to plant smaller ones,
I
so
like
that
the idea of
with
the
a higher
shrubs
survival
and
rate,
trees mix.
I really like that rate. And in terms of the fine, I like having a stiffer one than usual. Does it, even though the 300, I like the 30 tree thing, or whatever number of trees on a per tree basis. The only question I would have in my mind, it doesn't necessarily have to be 300 times each tree if we wanna mitigate, but, and again, it's just a thought. You're still focusing on how many trees were cut.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to necessarily be the 300
So
or 100 or 200 per tree, whatever.
Right, it's up to 300 per
Right.
incident. So my follow-up question to that is, we have some of these trees that were an inch diameter, which are really sapling trees, as opposed to
To a
8-inch
larger
diameter tree. So kind of, if you're going the route of fines, if I could have a little direction on how you want me to assess
What a
kind of, not
size.
everything in between, but something clearly very tiny versus something, say, greater than 4-inch diameter, which would be really getting past the sapling stage, getting into a tree.
Regulation doesn't delineate that, though.
Hmm?
regulation doesn't delineate that, it says no cutting, right?
It just says no, you know.
Well, you cut down the potential, and that's
I mean, there's
as
It
bad
does,
as cutting
right.
down a big
a
one.
couple of questions
But do
you
you
need to,
view it
need
more
to think
egregiously
about.
than the other? I don't know.
one would be to a given individual, maybe not this individual in particular, I don't know him, but in a like situation, perhaps a person would view it as the cost of doing business, the cost of what they wanted to achieve. Some people are willing to do that, some people aren't.
That's the way I look at all our, even if this fine amounted to $10,000, that's a very light fine in relation to the $4 million property and the view on that property. I mean, that, it's just not relevant to that. It's just not a very stiff fine. I mean,
I agree,
it's
but I think it's a big departure to what we've been doing.
Right.
So I think we have to quantify our approach. And so,
I think per tree makes sense, and, you know, not whether it be 3 inches or 4 inches or, you know,
I like 300 per tree, and then have us decide whether it's, you know, a 2-inch or 3-inch tree that's mature. You know, pines can start producing seed at, you know, certain size, a mature tree, and I understand we're giving up on future potential of little trees, but it's gotta fall into, I think, something that makes sense, quantifiable, and then we can apply it going forward to other cases.
So, something else I wanted to mention is the majority of these trees that were cut are pitch pines, and majority were flush cut. Those are gonna stump sprout.
Yeah.
So those will regenerate, which is good. I would just say let's let them regenerate. The ones that were cut, the trees that were cut pretty much in half, though, those are not going to become, probably those are gonna be hazard trees, are gonna be not viable. And also, the way they were cut, I mean, it could introduce, you know, pine bark beetles could be drawn to the rest of the pines in the area. I am in favor of flush cutting those too, and letting those start from scratch, because they were cut so, like, they're just cut in half.
you mean like there were 2 stems and they were cut?
Yeah.
One stem was cut?
Yeah.
Not just one, just literally the trees, whatever was there was just cut.
Oh, topped, yeah.
Complete,
This
but
big
yeah,
orange.
cut in half, but yeah.
At
cut
8 feet or something, or 6 feet.
6 feet.
Yeah.
4 or 5 feet.
So they were,
All right.
I just don't know, they will re-sprout off those, but they would be more viable in the long run if you were to flush cut those that were cut and allow them to regrow. But that's up to you.
But I'm not certain we can,
Well, I'd have to
Mandate.
talk to the association about
Right,
that, if
yeah.
they would be amenable to it.
yeah.
Are you finished?
They weren't cut properly, so they're open to disease and pests and things like that.
Well, that may be a tool. Perhaps that's an opportunity to allow the association to step up and rectify what's on their property, and let them use that as an instrument to express to their group the importance of not doing that. Another issue to consider, perhaps, this is a reoccurring thing, maybe, I know you've got nothing to do, but maybe a prepared interview with the conservation agent regarding the regulation in the detail in the Chronicle might be something to consider.
I'm happy to.
And
I'm
also,
actually doing a little dog and pony show at the library on March 24th, talking all about conservation and what we do.
well, what's the chance of getting that dog and pony show on a video? And
It'll be
putting it on
videoed. No,
Channel
it's videoed.
Put it on Channel 18,
It will be.
because that publication's all very beneficial. And, you know, like it was just said a little while ago, the repetitive issue of ignorance of the law, well,
Well, you could have a reporter there
Yeah.
at the dog and pony show.
Yeah, say it's
I think they
documented in the
will be
state,
there.
it's publicized. Everyone knows, at least 90% of the folks doing the work know.
More than that.
Yeah, large percentage, they know it's
Especially the contractors. I mean, the homeowners do know too, but like,
they're
really the
promoting
contractors
services to
need
make, you know,
come on.
I get-
billable.
I guess I'm still confused as to who's actually going to do the work on the association property? I mean, I know what we want done.
That's
But
actually
who's-
My
my
recommendation
question.
would be to give the association the opportunity to engage someone to do that and let them seek retribution.
Yeah, I mean, I
Backward.
really think, so the the individual stated that she was the one who had done it. So maybe maybe the commission or the association is the one who picks who actually gets to do the work on the replanting, who they're comfortable with or who we're comfortable with.
Property.
It's their property, but she will
She's
have to
gotta be
pay.
accountable to us, though, to get it, make it sure
Make
it
it
gets done.
done. And I'll explain to the association the importance, like, of getting it done. And it really doesn't that enhanced view doesn't benefit anybody in the association really, other than this property. So hopefully they won't have an issue with revegetating it on their dime, the owner's dime.
I would maybe propose a $300 per tree fine on trees over 3 inches in diameter, and then a replacement at a 2-to-1 ratio of a mixture of red cedars, beech plums, and bayberry.
I'd like to set a minimum on that fine. Carolyn, you have?
I do have a couple of thoughts, actually. Regarding the fine, you all know my tolerance for after-the-fact violations. I would be tempted to work out a fine schedule as if we knew who the contractor was,
It would be the same for him as it would be for her.
and then give her both bills.
Can't do that.
I think she can hand it to her contractor.
You can't do that, though, like,
Well, I'd be tempted, if you don't.
because, I mean, so this will probably, if she wants, it can be, it's a nice thought, believe me.
Okay.
It could go, like, she could challenge this in court, depending on how high the fine is, which is gonna get kinda high.
Yeah.
Plus the replanting, so she could challenge in court, and what would most likely happen is you come to a settlement.
But we don't want to go to litigation.
I'm gonna keep the enforcement order to do the replant separate from the fine, because I don't wanna get the replanting caught up in any legal things with the fine.
Okay. My
Okay.
second question, are we positive that it's not going to do any damage to the sand dune to put irrigation in it?
They're not going to.
No, it
You're gonna have
So,
to, backpacks or something like that, water, hoses.
long hoses, no in-ground irrigation.
No in-ground, but above-ground irrigation? No above-ground irrigation.
I would say no.
Rain dance.
I
I
told
do
her,
a lot of rain
I
dance.
told her, I said, somebody's gonna have to go water these trees.
So we're asking them to replace 30 trees, and they have to go water 'em with a watering can?
That is,
Okay, because otherwise, I'm thinking that above-ground irrigation could damage other plants
No,
in the
well,
area that are.
they're all the plants that are in that area are drought tolerant, heat.
Exactly, so we don't
plants.
wanna
They
put water
You don't wanna
in.
water them.
Is it too far to wheel in a tank and hose it that way?
No.
Yeah, so I think that'll work.
And can
Yeah.
can we require, like, a survival rate?
I was gonna do
replanting?
90%.
Yeah.
Okay, my other question is, can we actually require someone to plant things on somebody else's property? I mean, we're saying,
Well, that was the question.
Well, that's what we're just talking about.
I know,
I'm
I
gonna
If-
talk to the association.
I think the association would be fine with just a conversation saying, we're working this out.
we might want the association to be the agent requiring the replanting.
Well, our
know.
They
regulations.
have more,
They don't have enforcement
Strength.
power, though, necessarily, do
They
they?
don't have what?
Enforcement power. I mean, they can't force her to do this
You just want buy-in from
unless you go
them.
to,
Well, we can
Support.
force the association to do it, can't we?
it just has to get done.
Yeah, I think ultimately.
I think Amy
If
can
she
have
doesn't
a
choose to,
conversation.
if she chooses not to do it, ultimately it would be on the association to do it, and they would have to bill her and take care of that
Okay.
civilly.
Yeah, focus on the perpetrator.
Yeah, okay.
And don't have a fine that breaks the bank or forces them to try to get recourse legally. I hate to say that, but I think, you know, it has to be a reasonable fine that we can apply the same structure moving forward. So I like what Jim says, 30
Yep.
per tree of 3 inches. Maybe put some language that says that they're mature trees, or that, you know, trees that provide wildlife habitat, so it's kind of clear, it's not an arbitrary separation.
But how about a minimum of, say, $5,000?
Oh, we can only fine 300 per, has to be per an incident or per, so we can't really,
I think the structure you proposed, Jim, works well.
I'll let you know what it amounts to.
Yeah,
sounds like it probably will be over that, though. or-
yeah.
So,
Do you want to craft that into a motion?
sure, yeah, I'll make a motion to fine the owner of 51 Dunes Road for tree and vegetation removal at a rate of $300 per tree of over 3-inch diameter. Then separately to order the restoration with plantings at a 2-to-1 ratio of an equal amount of red cedars, bayberry, and
Beach plum?
beach plum.
I'll second that. Discussion?
Yeah, do you want to just clarify that the 2-to-1 ratio doesn't just apply to the 3-inch trees? Is that what you intend, or is it every cut plant?
It might be all right for just the you know, we actually don't want them to overplant it either.
Yeah, that's
And
what I was thinking.
At least this
too.
is adding some good diversity, and
So you don't propose to fine for the saplings?
no. Where, it sounds like there's over 23-inch,
There's not many that meet the sapling variety. There's only a couple. Most of them are 3 inches
3
up.
inches, so it sounds like the fine will be.
In this circumstance,
We're approaching double the largest fine's been issued in 10 years, as far as I'm aware. So.
And do we include a survival rate as part of that?
Yeah, I think Amy can do that in her conditions.
Said
or-
90%, I already have it written down.
um,
And that's after 3 years.
So I would say that ratio is just on those bigger trees, because you really don't want to overplant the dunes, and
No.
this would,
No, and take into consideration there's residual costs for the owner to continue this forward too, so the expense doesn't stop there. It's gonna be the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, they gotta hire somebody to plant.
Just gotta hire somebody to water.
The size like
Yeah.
Mark was talking about.
Yeah, I was gonna say 2 to 3 gallon size cedars.
You may want to specify the height. I'd go minimum of 18 inches, because that would get you in the 3 gallon.
18 inches to 3 feet.
18 to 24.
18 to 24 inches.
Maybe
I'll just
so.
do that, 18 to 24.
Yeah.
Quick question. I just wanted to say, added into that, so that this needs to be done this spring.
yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay, we've got a motion on the table, it's seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thanks,
Okay.
Amy. It's tough work, but it's gotta be done.
No, it's,
Yeah.
hey, it's part of my job.
Yeah.
That's a minutes.
Anything under board organization?
Oh, yeah, didn't see that. Well, you've been wanting to talk about reorganization for a while now, so since we have everybody here tonight,
Yeah?
if you wanted to reorganize, you could do so. It would be nice to, it's been mentioned to have a vice chair, so when maybe a chairman's present, we'd kind of know who's running meetings, when, you know,
Right.
can assume those duties and know that.
Yeah, I favor this for a long time. And the vice, you know, could probably eventually get a crack at being the chair if they so choose, if they wanted to. So, anyone interested, you know, the process is that somebody will nominate somebody for that position. but I guess it's, you know, I think everybody here could, you know, achieve that role, or chair, you know. But, anybody have a strong feeling of they'd like to be the vice?
I would like to offer a suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
I think, given Mr. Crabtree's experience, I would feel very comfortable with him at the helm.
Mm-hmm.
The only reservation I have, Mark, is there's a good chance that I won't be here 3 or 4 months out of the year in the wintertime, and that's we've talked about that in the past.
Right.
You know, I'm not sure I could do it service.
Okay, in that regard, since we're organizing, what if there is an alternate in your absence? So then there's a chain of command, if you will.
Well, we turn to the vice chair.
Are we discussing a vice chair now, or are we discussing?
Well, I was saying, no, we're discussing chair, but you're saying an alternate to the chairman when and if Ernie were to leave? Another person? What are you asking?
We're talking
I'm-
about vice chair.
Vice chairman.
Oh, Jesus. I'm sorry.
I think Stan's done a good job running these meetings.
I'm sorry. I couldn't,
You've
maybe I
done a
didn't
good
hear it
job
right.
running these meetings.
I think that the need I see is for not just this committee, but a lot of committees I've served on, is you like to have that vice that can step in. I missed 2 meetings in a row, and then also that person gets used to the process, and maybe they step up at some point. So I think that's valuable. So that's what I like to do. And if you guys want to mull it over and come back another meeting, let's do that. But I think fairly soon, I'd like to see a vice that you can count on that person to build up some experience and cover when the chair's not here.
Don't ask Jim, are you interested at all in?
Not particularly. I mean,
I used to love it when I was not chair, because I could really throw bombs and, you know, really work on the questions. There's a burden that comes with that, keeping the meeting going. So,
There is, but I think you've done a very good job at giving your opinions on each issue, whereas the previous chair did not. He ran the meeting, he was the parliamentarian.
he chose not to vote most of the time.
Yes.
And I wouldn't want to be here if I couldn't vote. So it was a different approach, but he was good at what he
It
did.
was good too, but
Yeah.
I think we value your opinions.
Well, thank you.
I look at you because you have more of the technical expertise and knowledge. And it's funny because when you said that, that's who I would have nominated along what your proposal was, Mark. But I can understand Ernie's, but going back to that question, well, what if it is only for 9 months of the year? Can you then have a fill-in or not?
I think for a vice, it's a little bit more easy to do. I didn't hear vice, Mark, when you said chair. I was like, oh, we're talking about a new chairman here? Oh, my goodness.
No,
No, I wasn't.
That's too much, okay.
Someday.
But I think a vice, it's probably doable, but that depends on your comfort level with it. But yes, you could have a temporary vice
I'm
for a few
comfortable
months.
doing it, just with that understanding that there will be meetings that I won't be here
Yep.
to attend.
Now, the planning board has a call-in for the meeting.
What?
A call-in, one of the
You
planning
can
board
miss,
members.
you can have it's like one meeting though, or something like that. Remote participation.
Well, if there is a chain of command, and there is a backup for the vice chair, at least it's in place, there's a system in place.
You could also do, technically, there's a secretary for Board of Selectmen, that's really the third in command, you know. You could do it that way if you wanted to. Really, your duties wouldn't be any more than they are now.
You're not talking, John, because if Ernie wasn't going to do it, I was going to suggest you.
Everyone here could do a fantastic
Yeah,
job.
everybody could.
I'm convinced of it.
No,
I don't mind stepping in when there's a vacuum. If no one else can do it, I don't mind chairing a meeting. But I haven't been on this committee as long as Ernie or, a lot of other people. So I feel it's a little soon for me to take on that role from my point of view.
My reason for suggesting that, though, is, again, you tend to dig into a lot of the specific questions that you have.
Technicalities, yeah. Yeah, which is always helpful.
Which is, again, digging into some of the the more technical things.
John, the former chair nominated me 3 times before I accepted, so that can always happen. I felt I wasn't ready or didn't want to, so that can be part of it, too. Well, what do you think? Which one of you would prefer to do it, or, is there,
Well, like I say, I have no reservations doing it, Brad, if you're comfortable with it. And I would, I think we really would need a backup, though.
Yeah.
Unless we left it to your discretion, if you were going to be absent, perhaps you could contact somebody and make
If
arrangements for
Brad
coverage.
was absent and Ernie was absent, we might not even have a quorum. So
Well,
it
that's,
might
you know
be
what, that's a
moot.
possibility. That's a distinct
And
possibility.
again, up until now, I mean, one of us can run the meeting
Yeah.
on a
Yeah.
random basis.
Yeah, they can.
Okay, then we'll consider your proposal a nomination.
Yes.
How's that?
Yes.
I'll second it.
And seconded by Stan. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we have a vice.
Voted in.
Yeah, and you weren't even out
You don't
tonight.
even have to tell your wife.
Oh, thanks. That'd be helpful.
All right, we have a vice.
Yay.
And you guys can vote me out at any time, too. So There's a big quorum right here,
I
so.
was really like, what is, I did not hear vice, I'm like, what's happening?
What's happening? It can happen.
I put the exec on in hopes that I would have, updates for you, I don't.
Okay.
Past that, other than we do have a date for, actually, you know what, I do have something I wanna talk to you about in executive session.
Okay.
Unless we have any other new business, I would like to talk to you about how to move forward with 30 Harbor Road.
Okay. Do you want to finish the minutes? 'Cause I wasn't here,
Oh, I'm
so
sorry.
I want to excuse myself for a minute and then finish the minutes.
I'm so sorry. I
And
didn't
the
even
last
see
thing
that
under new
jump.
business, I just wanted to kind of circle back on the bogs, whether there's any management coming up that we should discuss.
Yes,
We haven't had our subcommittee meeting yet, but,
the water needs to go out.
yeah, I got a call from mosquito control.
Well, it's
About-
also getting warm, who knows when those,
Already?
oh my gosh.
So that would be releasing the downstream boards
Correct.
as opposed to letting water in from the reservoir.
Correct.
I think that, myself, that could happen anytime.
Well, I was gonna talk to Heinz about doing it, as long
Yeah.
as you're all okay with it.
Yeah. Okay.
How long have we had it in there?
Just under 4 weeks.
Yeah, I was gonna say 4 or 5 weeks.
Is that long enough?
Had what in there?
You know what,
Water in the bogs.
there was
Oh.
very little benefit to doing it. It was a matter of insurance. If it happened to come off, the water would have protected the remainder of the vines. It's an advisable thing to do. It's not gonna be of any particular consequence either way.
Any late frost concerns to let it run for a couple more weeks?
No, probably not.
Mosquito control would like to see it done soon.
Yeah, he came in and talked to me,
Yeah.
and,
It's
I
tough.
did,
This is drained to the level that it was last fall, or are we just talking?
Down to the top of the ditch is the base of the
Yeah,
vegetation, more or
kind of how
less.
it was like late last summer, last fall.
Yep.
And that's basically how we'd leave it all summer.
You have to allow for water flow. It's gotta be high enough to,
yeah,
to
we'll have to have some
leave.
flow.
so
Yeah,
there's
that's
either gotta be
For
an inflow,
mosquitoes.
a trickle all the time,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
or you have to hope for a lot of rain, because so the water level will come up.
Yeah.
There's gotta be transfer of water.
So it might be leaving a certain number of boards
Boards, yeah.
on that lower end, like, that should be kind of managed somehow.
Right.
I
Yeah,
thought,
it's
I thought they went a little too low last September.
Okay.
Well, there's a couple things you gotta
Took them
consider.
all out,
The
basically.
particular board you're using, and you also gotta consider the height of the pond at the time,
Yeah.
because the rain is gonna impact that, and that's gonna determine what you have for available water to come in, and if you get an inch of rain, the pond's gonna come up a little bit.
We're talking about the lower end only, basically, though, yeah.
Well, here's what I recommend. I think we should have an on-site subcommittee site visit that everybody's welcome to attend in April and just begin that discussion on long-term management and concepts. We can pick a date later, but I think April's a really good time to go there and think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then Amy can work with Heinz, anytime, to remove the boards.
Yeah, I think we need to get ahead of the herring season here and make sure
Right.
I mean, I know we're only doing downstream boards, we're releasing water
Yep.
there, but I wanna make sure that everything else towards the pond is where it needs to be too, before
Mhm.
the herrings start running.
Yep, and we need to do our homework, I think, to plan for the future. We've been wanting to, we just haven't had a lot of time to do it.
I get it.
Yeah.
It's,
Okay.
it's possible in the right situation, the herring might swim in from the downstream side too.
I've been asked that, and I wonder, I think
Too much,
when, if we do it right away, we're gonna beat the run,
yeah,
and that's why I think it makes sense.
why we need to do that.
To get the majority of the flow out of there.
And I can't tell you if they go in there, the distance, I've seen them go longer, but I don't know how the elevations are inside the pipe.
It's pretty light, you can actually put your head in and you see right through the whole
Can
thing.
you? Okay,
Yeah,
then-
it's
then-
actually real easy to see all the way through that
In that
pipe.
case, they could come through, so we,
If you had a big flow.
yeah, so you want that big flow to happen like tomorrow, get the
I was
water.
gonna say, everything is already early, the red-winged blackbirds were back like
Yeah.
3 weeks
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah,
Everything is popping.
we saw, my son saw 50 herring there 2 weeks ago on a Saturday.
Wow.
He was there with, he's interning for the town, the harbor master, and he was there with one of the staff, and
Wow. Yeah.
he said there were 50 herring there. And in the same week, we had reports in Mashpee and Dennis. And not super early, given how warm it is, but they're probably, they call them early scouts.
Yeah.
They're males looking around. All right, well, I'm gonna step out for just a minute if you guys wanna
We can do the
knock out the minutes.
So there's minutes of February 19th.
Yeah, I don't have any comments.
All set. I guess I'll move we approve the minutes for February 19th.
Second.
All those in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Yeah, good job, got that right.
Okay. Before we go into executive session, I think Brad wouldn't mind if we started talking about this. I handed out 2 things to you. There's a letter, and then there's a questionnaire with answers. So this is in regards to the budget meeting with the Board of Selectmen that all town departments are gonna be doing this Saturday. It'll be here in the Griffin Room. The conservation slot is in the afternoon between 12:20 and 2:30-ish. It is on the Selectmen agendas online, if you look. We're kind of right in the middle of the pack. They're gonna go in order. So, as you know, we've talked about it before, there are cuts proposed to the expenses to maintain a 2.5% increase overall in the department. And I put together a letter. There's a few wordy things I want to go through and make it sound a little better, but hopefully you agree with the letter that I wrote. After I printed it out, I did add about the shorebirds. Okay, Brad, we were just talking before we go into executive session about the 2 items that I left for you. One's a letter to the Board of Selectmen, which will be discussed on Saturday. Saturday is the budget meeting with the Board of Selectmen in the afternoon. Would encourage anybody, if you want to attend and support my budget recommendation, to do so. And then, we've had to reduce our expense budget by 48%. And I've talked about how this would be really detrimental to the operation of the department and what we do. You don't have to vote on any of this. I wanted to give it to you. If you have any last minute suggestions, let me know. Then there's there's another sheet with questions that they're going to ask of me. And I provided the answers that I could. So if you have any input now or whatever, just let me know.
Where do these 2 go together?
Together.
They go together,
So I
okay.
wrote the letter, not the numbered, but the letter prior to knowing about I wrote the majority of the letter prior to knowing the questions that were gonna get answered. There's a little redundancy between the 2, but not completely. I think the letter is more of trying to really give them the town an understanding of what this would impact.
Yeah, the only thing I'd suggest, Amy, is under number 2 on the question and answer, you mentioned the shorebird monitor position, and I'd actually put somewhere in there, you know, a reference to this separate document.
Okay, because I did add a whole section about shorebirds to that letter after I printed it out for you, too, in that letter, but I will reference that other letter.
I'm not sure which one you're talking about.
The one on my right,
This one.
I
Yeah.
added another paragraph at the end of it that you don't have.
Oh, okay.
But I
yeah,
can write in that one,
Just say,
please see memo dated da-da-da,
yeah,
something.
just so that someone doesn't pick this up and get left hanging if they don't have this in the documents.
That was number 2, you said?
It's under number 2. You talk about the increase of 5.3%.
Oh, yeah.
Contractual salary, and then you talk about.
And moving the shorebird
and
monitor position.
Is that really part of the 5.3%, 5.43%, the shorebird position? Oh, it is. Okay.
So it looks at overall, it's salaries, we have two different, we have salary and wages line item, and then we have expense line items.
I thought the shorebird was ours from last year as well, the expense for that, the shorebird
It
monitor.
was half and half. Part of it came out of John Rendon's, and then the fiscal year being July messes that up, because that position spans 2 fiscal years. So yes, technically this past fiscal year into now, into July of this year, into July 1st of this year would be ours.
Oh, okay.
Amy, on number 8, do you think this would be a place to propose changing the cap on our use of the revolving fund?
Yeah, we could definitely have that discussion. I think that would have to be a separate
Is
meeting
that-
with the Board of Selectmen, like on
It's
a
just-
regular agenda.
It says, are any changes proposed? I mean, I think it's
Oh.
really important to get that change on the table, and that could also help with the budget in a way, because
Right.
that money can be used for various things that the department is interested in. And I don't know what we would be proposing, just no cap on it, or maybe I don't know. There's not much point in just having a savings account sitting there.
I agree.
That's just accruing money. It would actually be a way to kind of help mitigate budget
Well,
issues, you know?
But for that, because we have to, revolving account for wetlands could only be used for purposes of holding the Wetland Protection Act. So
Right.
that can be land protection, purchase.
Yep.
Some of our land management items might be able to fit in there too, but
Yeah.
we couldn't use things in upland.
Right, no, I understand that, but, you know, that money could be really valuable in Bell's Neck almost immediately. You know, we
Yep.
could, say, start that,
Right.
you know, some of that restoration work in that area, rather than just let it sit there.
Mm-hmm.
And I would think the selectmen, if they were aware that it's just sitting like that, you know, would want us to use it. It's not-
I thought I heard something that wasn't what I understood. The shorebird monitor, wasn't that under the salary line?
It is,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Right.
Amy, and
So
number,
the bottom line, really, for everybody, being the accountant in the room, I mean, she's trying to cut 5% out of an 11, or 5,000, which is of her total budget of about $5,000, out of an $11,000 line, because the other stuff is out of her control, all the salaries and benefits. So it's really, she's trying to cut 50% out of a $11,000
And we
line.
can, I'm not saying we can't cut I mean, I'm.
No, but I'm just
Right.
saying,
It's a lot.
that's a huge impact on that one little line of which, I mean, and yet there are other items that affect that line that she doesn't get the benefit of revenue.
Right, the
Such as the garden fees. She's paying $3,000 for water to support the gardens, but the fees are going into the general budget, or general fund.
Yeah, so we're paying for water, but we're also
So
not getting the
it's
fees,
really.
it's like double.
yeah.
Yeah, that's double jeopardy. I mean,
Yeah.
that needs to be explained.
I've already
Yeah, that
told-
should be an argument someplace.
Oh, it is.
in this.
It's in her
Yes.
letter.
I would also, in number 8, when we're talking about the in lieu fees, I don't think we should give the expectation that we will bring in more money next year.
No,
I think that the priority is for mitigation
right,
on the site, in the ground.
it's kind of a last-ditch effort, is
This
what
is
it
the last, I think we need to make them clear.
I
Yeah.
was gonna
That
talk
we're
a
not
little
gonna
bit
go
more
around
about it, like,
starting charging for mitigation and getting lots more money.
this is a blueprint
So-
for the discussion that I'm gonna have on Saturday. We have 15 minutes to, it's actually a fair amount of time to talk about this.
The thing you were pointing out was, how many people might attend, because you wanted to know if you needed to post this as a.
Yeah, so,
What was
we
the
are
date again?
Saturday.
This Saturday?
Yeah.
Yep. What time?
I don't know an exact time. It's gonna be the afternoon session, which is
Yeah.
between 12:30 or 12:20 and 2:30, 3 o'clock. And we're kind of right in the middle of the pack.
So you don't have to post if 2 of us show.
I don't have to post it if 3 of you show.
Okay.
And there's question, like, but if 4 of you show,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a quorum. And I don't mind posting it, because I can do it first thing in the morning. It's
Yeah.
not a hard thing for me to do. If you all want to come, I welcome your support.
Yeah.
Why don't you do it and then you're protected?
That's what I was probably going to do anyways.
No.
That's what I was thinking afterwards. We were talking in the car, and I was like, it's really not that much work. I'm sitting there to post the agenda. If more of you come, then I do have to write like a little blurb of minutes, basically, just on our part.
But if we don't say anything, then you don't have to write anything.
Probably have to write,
We just stand there.
nothing was.
Nothing was
Nothing was
contributed.
contributed by our
Nothing was
by
contributed
commissioners.
by the commissioners.
One little line that might confuse people when it says on
The letter or the numbers?
on number 8 here, projects within buffer zones to wetlands cannot meet the regulations but will not have a negative impact to wetland resource areas. That,
That's wordy.
well, the whole reason for mitigation is that they have a negative impact. If they don't have a negative impact, then we shouldn't even be asking for any mitigation, so, it's just that might get confusing. I kinda know what you mean, like if it's a project that's acceptable to us, but,
Right.
that we think it's an acceptable project to have off-site mitigation, which means it probably isn't that harmful to the resources, but
All right. I'll try to.
if there's no harm whatsoever, if there's zero adverse impact, then,
You could strike that almost without losing too much of the.
Yeah.
yeah,
Just
I would just,
Eliminate from but
just
to the
strike it.
period.
That's, yeah. All right,
Do we charge a fee for the garden plots now?
we do.
But it goes into the
It's
general
$40 a plot.
Okay, you should mention what the current fee is. You talk about, if I was charging $50 per plot.
Yeah, it's 40 now.
20, and I'd say up from the current $40
Up from the
we charge
current,
or something
yeah.
like that.
So we pay for the water, but the fees go to the town?
Yeah, doesn't that make
Yeah,
sense?
that's not, I mean, maybe there's a way that can change. That just seems like another way of converting,
Yeah, ask the selectmen to pay for the water.
well, just let the fees pay for the water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, we're not trying to make money
No.
off the gardens. Like, we're trying to, is level.
Just have it go to the water department or something, whatever makes sense, but.
Yeah. It's hard to know for sure. Some years we spend only 2,000. Last year we spent 3,200, or it all depends on the year.
Or maybe it's just not appropriate for the conservation department to get that bill.
The water bill.
Lynn
It is our
said-
land.
Lynn said she'd like you to put a farm stand in front of the gardens along the road there.
Oh, wouldn't that be nice?
You could put a little honor system in there like you do with yours, so all their excess produce can be right there for people to stop and pick up.
I think that's a good
The
idea.
opportunity
We had
to
a
do that,
donation
just
box
as soon
for
as that
the
meadow down
homeless
back is
shelters for a couple of
turned
years.
into a market garden.
Every year I'd bring a shipment to the homeless shelters every Friday of the excess goods. Did that.
All right, so I think you'll get some
Then the
support
box got stolen.
Saturday.
That's all I have. So
Okay.
if you want a quick update into executive session, we'll have to, I do want to give you a quick update on
Okay, so,
Great Harbor, so you have to,
so we'll adjourn.
not
For-
to return, yeah.
Yep, so I move that we adjourn the regular meeting tonight, and we enter into executive session. I guess first I should motion to adjourn,
Yes.
and look for a second.
Second.
Second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so we're adjourned with a regular session, and then I move that we